This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I arrived at the campground on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in July. The weather was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze rustling through the ponderosa pines. I found a secluded spot to set up my tent, about a quarter-mile from the main camping area. It was quiet and peaceful, with no other campers in sight. Just me, my gear, and the great outdoors. After getting my campsite set up, I spent the rest of the day hiking some nearby trails and taking in the stunning scenery. The Black Hills lived up to their reputation, rolling hills covered in dark green forest, dramatic rock formations jutting up towards the sky, and scenic vistas around every turn. I felt a deep sense of tranquility wash over me as I breathed in the crisp mountain air. This was exactly the kind of retreat I needed to recharge. As the sun began to set, I made my way back to my campsite to cook dinner and settle in for the night. I had just finished eating and was sitting by my small campfire, enjoying the stillness, when I heard the distant rumble of engines. At first I didn't think much of it, probably just some cars on the main road a few miles away. But the sound grew steadily louder, and I realized it was coming from much closer. Suddenly, 4 motorcycles came roaring down the narrow dirt road leading to my secluded campsite. My heart started racing as they pulled up and circled around my tent, engines revving loudly. The riders were all large, burly men dressed in leather jackets covered in patches. They didn't look like the typical tourists you'd see in a national park. One of them, a huge guy with a long gray beard, cut his engine and got off his bike. He sauntered over to where I was sitting, towering over me. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he sneered. "Looks like we found ourselves a little camper all alone in the woods." I tried to stay calm, even as panic started to build inside me. "Can I help you guys with something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The bearded man laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Oh, I think you can definitely help us out. See, me and my boys here were looking for a place to party tonight, and it looks like we just found the perfect spot." My mouth went dry as the other 3 men got off their bikes and started walking towards me. They were all similarly intimidating, muscular guys covered in tattoos, with mean looks in their eyes. I was seriously outnumbered and outmatched. "Listen, I don't want any trouble," I said, slowly standing up. "Why don't you guys find another spot to hang out? There's plenty of room in the main campground." "Nah, we like it right here," said one of the other men, a bald guy with a nasty scar across his cheek. "Got a nice little setup and everything. Think we'll stay a while." Before I could respond, the bearded leader suddenly kicked over my camp chair, sending me stumbling backwards. "Better run along now, little camper," he growled. "Unless you want to join our party. Might get a little rough for you, though." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Fight or flight instinct was kicking in hard, and flight was definitely winning out, but I couldn't just abandon all my gear. "Please, just take what you want and leave," I said, hating how my voice shook. "I don't have much, but you're welcome to my food and beer." The 4 men exchanged amused glances. "Oh, we'll take what we want, all right," said the bald one with a cruel smile. "But I don't think you understand. We ain't here to rob you. We're here to have some fun." With that, he strode over to my tent and started ripping it apart. The others quickly joined in, laughing as they destroyed my campsite. They dumped out my backpack, stomped on my sleeping bag, and smashed my lantern. I stood there frozen, too terrified to move or speak. The bearded leader walked up to me, getting right in my face. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "What's the matter, boy? Cat got your tongue?" He poked me hard in the chest. "Maybe we need to loosen you up a bit." He grabbed me by the shirt and dragged me over to where the others were ransacking my gear. They had found the 6-pack of beer I'd brought and were passing the cans around. The leader shoved a beer in my hand. "Drink up," he commanded. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the can. I took a small sip, praying they would get bored soon and leave. But they seemed to just be getting started. For the next hour, they tormented me relentlessly. They made me chug beers until I was dizzy and nauseous. They took turns shoving me around, laughing as I stumbled and fell. At one point, they tied my hands behind my back with some rope from my gear. I was completely at their mercy, and they knew it. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the bald guy pulled out a lighter. "Hey, boys, who wants to roast some marshmallows?" he called out with a maniacal grin. Before I could process what was happening, he had set my tent on fire. The nylon material went up in flames instantly. I watched in horror as everything I had brought, my clothes, my hiking gear, my phone, was consumed by the inferno. The 4 men whooped and cheered, clearly delighted by the destruction. As the fire raged, consuming my belongings, I felt a deep sense of despair wash over me. I was stranded in the wilderness with these maniacs. No supplies, no way to call for help. For a moment, I truly believed I was going to die out here. But then, as quickly as it had started, it was over. The bearded leader clapped his hands and said, "All right, boys, that's enough fun for one night. Let's hit the road." To my shock and relief, they all got on their bikes and roared off into the night, leaving me alone with the smoldering remains of my campsite. I stood there for several minutes, ears ringing in the sudden silence. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stand. Eventually, survival instinct kicked in, and I realized I needed to get out of there fast. Those guys could always decide to come back, and I did not want to be around if they did. I frantically searched through the wreckage, managing to find my car keys, which had miraculously survived the fire. I sprinted through the dark woods to where I had parked my car about a half-mile away. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified I would see headlights coming after me. Finally reaching my car, I peeled out of there as fast as I could. I drove straight to the ranger station about 20 miles away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel the entire time. When I burst in and told the startled ranger on duty what had happened, he immediately called the police. They took my statement and sent out patrols to look for the motorcyclists, but they were long gone by then. The rangers were incredibly kind, giving me some spare clothes and letting me sleep on a cot in the station that night. But I barely slept a wink, jumping at every little sound. The next morning, I drove the 5 hours back home in a daze. I was physically fine aside from some bruises, but mentally I was a wreck. It took weeks before I could sleep through the night without nightmares. To this day, the sound of a motorcycle engine makes me break out in a cold sweat. I used to love solo camping and being alone in nature. But after that night, I don't think I'll ever go out in the wilderness by myself again. The peace and solitude I once cherished now feels sinister and threatening. Those men took more than just my gear that night. They stole my sense of safety and independence. I still don't understand why they targeted me or what they really wanted. Was it just random chance that they came across my campsite? Or had they been watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike? The not knowing is almost worse than the actual attack. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they hadn't decided to leave when they did. How much further would they have gone? It's a question that haunts me, along with so many others. Why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I try to run earlier? Could I have done anything differently? Rationally, I know I'm lucky to have escaped relatively unharmed. It could have been so much worse. But emotionally, I'm still struggling to process what happened. That night in the Black Hills changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. All I know for sure is that I'll never take my safety for granted again, especially out in the wilderness. The peacefulness of nature now feels like an illusion, one that can be shattered in an instant by the cruelty of strangers. I was on my third day of trekking through the dense Adirondack wilderness when I stumbled upon something I never expected to see. As a wildlife photographer and amateur naturalist, I'd come to these remote forests hoping to capture images of elusive animals like black bears and bobcats. Instead, I found myself face to face with a very different kind of predator. The day had started like any other on my solo expedition. I woke before dawn, packed up my small tent, and set off into the misty woods with my camera gear. The air was crisp and damp, heavy with the earthy scent of decaying leaves. As I hiked, I kept my senses alert for any signs of animal activity. A snapped twig, a rustling in the underbrush, fresh tracks in the soft soil. By midday, I'd covered several miles of rugged terrain without seeing much besides squirrels and songbirds. I was starting to get discouraged, wondering if I should try a different area. That's when I heard it, a distant mechanical rumble that seemed out of place in these pristine woods. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate the source of the noise. As I got closer, the rumbling grew louder. It was clearly the sound of heavy machinery, but what could it be doing out here in a protected wilderness area? My heart started to race as I realized I might be stumbling onto something illegal. I slowed my pace and moved as quietly as possible, using the thick foliage for cover. Cresting a small ridge, I suddenly had a clear view into a small valley below. What I saw made my blood run cold. A group of men were operating several large pieces of logging equipment, ruthlessly felling massive old-growth trees. This was definitely not a sanctioned operation. They were destroying a protected forest. I crouched behind a fallen log and pulled out my camera, zooming in to capture evidence of the illegal activity. As I snapped photos, I noticed more details that confirmed my suspicions. The men weren't wearing any official uniforms or safety gear. Their equipment lacked proper markings, and the way they were clear-cutting indiscriminately was a far cry from sustainable forestry practices. I was so focused on documenting the scene that I didn't notice one of the loggers had separated from the group. It wasn't until I heard a twig snap right behind me that I realized my mistake. I spun around to find myself staring down the barrel of a shotgun. "Well, well, looks like we got ourselves a little spy," the man sneered. He was a burly, bearded guy in his 40s, with cold eyes and a mean set to his jaw. "Stand up real slow and don't try anything stupid." My heart pounding, I rose to my feet with my hands raised. The logger roughly grabbed my camera and smashed it on a nearby rock. "Hey, boss," he called out. "We got a problem over here." The whine of chainsaws cut off as the rest of the logging crew came to investigate. There were 5 of them total, all big, tough-looking guys who clearly didn't welcome my presence. Their leader, a wiry man with a scarred face, looked me up and down with narrowed eyes. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing out here?" he demanded. I swallowed hard, mind racing. I'm just a hiker," I stammered. "Got a bit lost and was trying to find my way back to the trail. I didn't mean to disturb you guys." The boss clearly wasn't buying it. "Bullshit. You're some kind of ranger or eco-freak, ain't you? Here to mess with our operation." "No, I swear I'm not." I started to protest, but he cut me off with a sharp gesture. "Save it. We can't risk you running to the authorities." He turned to his crew. "Take him deeper into the woods and make sure he has an accident. Make it look convincing." A chill of terror ran down my spine as I realized these men intended to kill me. In that moment of panic, survival instinct took over. I suddenly dropped and rolled, catching my captors off guard. As they lunged to grab me, I scrambled to my feet and took off running into the thick undergrowth. Angry shouts erupted behind me as I crashed through the forest. I could hear them crashing after me, but I had a head start. My legs pumped furiously as I dodged between trees and leaped over fallen logs. Branches whipped at my face, but I ignored the stinging cuts. All that mattered was putting distance between me and my pursuers. I had no idea where I was going, just away from the loggers. The sound of their voices faded, but I knew they wouldn't give up easily. These guys knew these woods far better than I did. My only hope was to find somewhere to hide until they gave up the search. After what felt like hours of frantic running, I finally had to stop to catch my breath. Leaning against a tree, I listened intently for any signs of pursuit. The forest was eerily silent except for my own ragged breathing. I took a moment to get my bearings and plan my next move. That's when I spotted it through the trees, the dim outline of some kind of structure. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a park ranger station where I could find help. I cautiously made my way closer, alert for any traps or ambushes. As I approached, I realized it was actually an old trapper's cabin, long abandoned and half reclaimed by the forest. The roof had partially caved in and vines crawled up the walls. It wasn't much, but it was the only shelter around. I slipped inside, praying it would provide enough cover to hide me from the loggers. The interior of the cabin was dark and musty. Leaves and debris littered the floor, and I could hear small animals scurrying in the walls. I found a spot in the corner where I could watch the entrance while staying hidden in the shadows. Then I waited, hardly daring to breathe. Time seemed to crawl by at an agonizing pace. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves outside made me tense up, certain I was about to be discovered. The light filtering through the cracks in the walls slowly faded as evening approached. Still, I didn't dare move or make a sound. Just when I thought maybe I was in the clear, I heard voices approaching. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the gruff tones of the logging crew. They were methodically sweeping the area, and the cabin was right in their path. I pressed myself as far back into my hiding spot as possible, willing myself to become invisible. Heavy footsteps creaked on the rotting porch. The door swung open with a groan. "Check every nook and cranny," a voice growled. "That bastard's gotta be around here somewhere." Flashlight beams swept across the cabin's interior. I held my breath, certain that at any moment the light would fall on me. I could see the outlines of two men just feet away from my hiding spot. "Doesn't look like anyone's been in here for years," one of them said. "Let's move on." I wanted to cry with relief as they turned to leave, but then one of them paused. "Wait a sec. What's that over there?" My heart nearly stopped. Had they spotted me after all? I tensed, ready to make a desperate last stand. But then I heard a skittering sound, and a large rat darted out from a pile of debris. The loggers cursed and laughed. "Damn vermin! Come on, we're wasting time here." The door slammed shut, and their voices faded into the distance. I remained frozen in place for several more minutes, hardly daring to believe my luck. Finally, when I was certain they were gone, I allowed myself to breathe again. I spent a cold, miserable night huddled in that decaying cabin, jumping at every sound. As soon as the first hints of dawn appeared, I cautiously emerged from my hiding place. The forest was quiet. It seemed the loggers had given up their search. Exhausted and disoriented, I picked a direction and started walking. I had lost all my gear in my panicked flight, so I had no food, water, or way to navigate. All I could do was keep moving and hope I found my way back to civilization before the loggers found me. After several grueling hours of hiking, I finally heard the blessed sound of traffic. I stumbled out onto a road and flagged down the first car I saw. The startled driver took one look at my wild appearance and sped off, but the second car stopped. It was an older couple who kindly drove me to the nearest ranger station. I poured out my story to the park rangers, who immediately contacted law enforcement. They assured me they would investigate right away and thanked me for reporting the illegal logging operation. As much as I wanted to go home and forget the whole terrifying ordeal, I knew I had to stay to help the authorities locate the site. The next day, I led a team of rangers and police to the area where I'd discovered the loggers. Sure enough, we found clear evidence of their destructive activities. While we were documenting the scene, we heard engines start up in the distance. The loggers had returned to continue their work, not realizing they'd been discovered. What followed was a tense standoff as the authorities surrounded and apprehended the illegal logging crew. Seeing those men in handcuffs brought an overwhelming sense of relief. They would face justice for their crimes against the forest and for nearly taking my life. In the weeks that followed, I gave statements to police and forestry officials. The investigation revealed that the loggers were part of a larger criminal syndicate involved in timber poaching across the region. My photos, recovered from the memory card of my smashed camera, provided crucial evidence to bring down the entire operation. While I'm proud that my actions helped protect the forest, the experience left me deeply shaken. Those quiet woods I once found so peaceful now feel menacing. I still have nightmares about being hunted through the trees, but I won't let fear stop me from continuing my work as a wildlife photographer. If anything, I'm more committed than ever to documenting and preserving our precious wild places. Someone has to be a voice for the voiceless, even when it means putting yourself in harm's way. It was a crisp autumn morning when I set out on a hike through the dense forests of the Ozarks. The vibrant fall colors and the gentle rustling of leaves under my feet initially filled me with a sense of calm. I had been walking for a couple of hours, enjoying the solitude, when I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin tucked away in a small clearing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. As I approached, I noticed the weathered wood and broken windows, giving the cabin an eerie, abandoned feel. But something felt off. There was a faint smell of smoke in the air, and I could have sworn I heard movement inside. Against my better judgment, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The silence that followed was deafening. I was about to turn back when suddenly the cabin door burst open with a loud crack. A man emerged, wild-eyed and disheveled, clutching a shotgun. His clothes were tattered, and his long matted hair and beard made him look like he'd been living in the wilderness for years. The moment our eyes met, I knew I was in danger. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" he snarled, raising the shotgun and pointing it directly at me. My heart began to race, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. I raised my hands slowly, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't know anyone lived here. I was just hiking and—" "Shut up," he barked, taking a step closer. "You're one of them, aren't you? Sent to spy on me." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I could see the paranoia and anger in his eyes. This man was clearly not in his right mind, and I knew I had to get out of there fast. "No, no, you've got it all wrong," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just a tourist. I'll leave right now and never come back." As I started to back away slowly, he suddenly fired a warning shot into the air. The sound was deafening, echoing through the forest and sending birds scattering from the trees. I flinched, my ears ringing from the blast. "Don't move," he shouted, lowering the gun back towards me. "I know what you're up to. You can't fool me." In that moment, survival instinct took over. I turned and ran as fast as I could, crashing through the underbrush. I could hear him cursing and stomping after me, branches snapping under his feet. Another shot rang out, and I felt the wind of it passing close to my head. Panic surged through me, giving me an extra burst of speed. I ran blindly, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and that madman as possible. I don't know how long I ran, but it felt like hours. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like lead. Suddenly my foot caught on a root, and I went down hard. Pain shot through my ankle as I tumbled down a small embankment, coming to rest in a tangle of leaves and branches. For a moment I lay there, gasping for air, terrified that I would hear the man's heavy footsteps approaching. But there was only silence, broken by the occasional bird call and my own ragged breathing. Gingerly, I tried to stand, but a sharp pain in my ankle made me gasp. It wasn't broken, but I had definitely sprained it badly. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but I was hopelessly lost. The dense canopy above me blocked out most of the sunlight, making it impossible to tell which direction I had come from. I knew I couldn't stay where I was. That man could still be out there, hunting for me. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I forced myself to my feet and started limping in what I hoped was the direction of civilization. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to close in around me. Every snapping twig made me jump, convinced that the wild man was right behind me. The pain in my ankle had become a constant throb, and I was exhausted, hungry, and desperately thirsty. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, I heard the distant sound of traffic. With renewed energy, I pushed through the undergrowth, finally emerging onto a narrow country road. I nearly cried with relief when I saw a car approaching. The elderly couple in the car were alarmed by my appearance, dirty, bloodied, and limping, but they kindly drove me to the nearest police station. I poured out my story to the officers, my words tumbling over each other in my haste to explain what had happened. But as I talked, I could see the skepticism growing in their eyes. They exchanged glances, and one of them asked, "Sir, have you been drinking or using any substances today?" I was stunned. "No, of course not. I'm telling you, there's a dangerous man out there with a gun. You have to do something." They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They suggested that perhaps I had gotten lost and panicked, imagining the whole encounter. But I knew what I had seen and experienced. The terror had been all too real. In the end, they agreed to send a patrol car out to the area I had described. But I could tell they were just humoring me. They arranged for me to be taken to the local hospital to have my ankle looked at, and that was that. As I sat in the emergency room, waiting to be seen, the events of the day kept replaying in my mind. The wild man's face, contorted with rage and paranoia. The sound of the shotgun blast. The blind panic as I ran for my life through the forest. It all seemed so surreal now, sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital. Days passed, and I heard nothing from the police. When I called to follow up, they told me they had found no evidence of anyone living in the area I had described. No cabin, no shotgun shells, nothing. They gently suggested that I might want to speak to someone about the stress I had been under, implying that the whole thing might have been a product of an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. That man was real, and he's still out there somewhere in the Ozarks. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear his angry shouts and the sound of a shotgun being cocked. My relaxing solo trip turned into a nightmare that continues to haunt me. I can't help but wonder, what if I hadn't gotten away? What if next time someone else stumbles upon that cabin and isn't so lucky? I've tried to put it behind me, to convince myself that maybe I did imagine it all. But deep down, I know the truth, and I can't shake the feeling that someday, somehow, I'll cross paths with that wild man again. Until then, I'll carry this story with me, a reminder of the day I came face to face with true terror in the seemingly peaceful forests of the Ozarks. I've never been much of an outdoorsy person, but last summer I decided to challenge myself with a solo camping trip in the Smoky Mountains. I'd done some research online and thought I was prepared for a peaceful few days of hiking and communing with nature. Little did I know the terror that awaited me in those misty forests. I arrived at the trailhead on a Tuesday morning in late June. The air was thick and humid as I shouldered my pack and set off down the trail. For the first few hours, everything was picture perfect. Lush greenery all around, the soothing sounds of birds and insects, scenic views of the misty mountains in the distance. I felt proud of myself for finally getting out of my comfort zone. As evening approached, I found a nice clearing to set up camp for the night. I pitched my little one-person tent, got a small fire going, and settled in to enjoy the sunset. That's when I first got the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, peering into the deepening shadows between the trees. But I saw nothing out of the ordinary and tried to shake off the paranoia. I crawled into my tent around 10 p.m., exhausted from the day's hike. Sleep came quickly, but it didn't last long. I jolted awake sometime in the middle of the night, heart racing. For a few moments I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush, circling my campsite. Panic seized me. I fumbled for my flashlight with shaking hands. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly weak. "Is someone there?" No response, just more footsteps. Closer now. I unzipped the tent flap and shone my light out into the inky blackness. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, a shadowy figure darting behind a tree. I screamed and zipped the tent back up, cowering in my sleeping bag. The rest of the night passed in a haze of terror. I didn't sleep a wink, convinced that whoever, or whatever, was out there would rip through the flimsy nylon of my tent at any moment. But nothing happened. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, the footsteps faded away. I emerged from my tent the next morning feeling drained and on edge. I seriously considered packing up and heading back to civilization, but I felt stupid for getting so worked up over what was probably just a curious animal. I decided to stick it out. I'd come all this way after all. I spent the day hiking deeper into the backcountry, trying to distract myself with the beauty of my surroundings. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump. By the time I made camp that evening, my nerves were frayed. I didn't even bother with a fire, just scarfed down some trail mix and crawled into my tent as soon as it got dark. Sleep evaded me. I tossed and turned for hours, my mind conjuring all sorts of terrifying scenarios. A twig snapped loudly outside my tent. I went rigid, hardly daring to breathe. More snaps, getting closer. Then a shadow fell across the side of my tent, a human silhouette. "Who's there?" I croaked out. A gravelly voice responded, "Just a fellow hiker. Mind if I join your camp for the night?" Every instinct screamed danger, but I was too terrified to say no. With trembling hands, I unzipped the tent. The man who ducked inside was tall and rail-thin, with wild gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. He smelled strongly of dirt and sweat. "Mighty kind of you," he said, settling cross-legged on the floor of my tiny tent. "Gets mighty lonely out here in these woods." I nodded mutely, pressing myself as far back as I could. "You out here all alone?" he asked, his gaze boring into me. I hesitated, then lied. No, my friends are camped just down the trail. They'll be expecting me in the morning." He smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "Is that so? Funny, I've been watching you for days now, haven't seen no friends." Ice flooded my veins. This was the person, the thing, that had been stalking me. "What do you want?" I whispered. He leaned in close, his rancid breath hot on my face. "Just a little company. It does get so lonely out here. I don't know where I found the courage, but in that moment, survival instinct took over. I kicked out hard, catching him in the chest. As he fell back with a grunt, I lunged for the tent zipper and burst out into the night. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, calling out in that horrible raspy voice, "Come back, little one, you can't escape me." I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. My lungs were on fire, my legs leaden, but stark terror kept me going, stumbling through the pitch-black forest. Finally, mercifully, I saw lights ahead. I burst out of the tree line into the parking lot of a ranger station. I collapsed on the gravel, gasping for air. The rangers were alarmed when they found me, covered in scratches and wild-eyed with fear. I babbled out my story between sobs. They searched the area but found no sign of my pursuer. To this day, I don't know if what I experienced was real or some kind of hallucination brought on by isolation and paranoia. But I still wake up in a cold sweat some nights, imagining those glowing blue eyes watching me from the darkness. I've never gone camping again. The thought of being alone in the wilderness fills me with a primal dread I can't shake. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there in those misty mountains, waiting for his next victim to wander into his domain. If you're planning a solo trip to the Smokies, I beg you, reconsider. You never know what's lurking in those ancient forests, watching and waiting. The day started like any other on my week-long expedition. I woke up at dawn, packed up my small campsite, and set out on the pristine waters as the morning mist was still rising. The tranquility of the landscape always filled me with a sense of peace. The towering pines reflected in the glass-like lake surface, the calls of loons echoing across the water. I had been paddling for a few hours when I decided to take a break on a small rocky island to stretch my legs and have a snack. As I was sitting on a fallen log munching on some trail mix, I noticed some movement on the distant shoreline. Squinting my eyes, I could just make out what looked like a group of men loading large objects onto a boat. There was something off about the scene. They seemed to be in a hurry, glancing around furtively as they worked. A chill ran down my spine. This was an extremely remote area, rarely visited even by other paddlers. What could they be doing out here? My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to paddle a bit closer to investigate. As I approached, staying close to the shoreline to remain hidden, I could see there were 5 men, all dressed in dark clothing. The objects they were loading appeared to be large duffel bags or cases of some kind. One of the men was holding what looked unmistakably like a rifle. Suddenly, a twig snapped under my foot, and one of the men whipped his head in my direction. Our eyes locked for a split second before I ducked behind a tree. My heart was pounding in my chest. I heard shouting and the sound of a boat engine roaring to life. Panic flooded through me as I realized they had spotted me and were now in pursuit. I sprinted back to my canoe, nearly falling as I scrambled over the uneven ground. With shaking hands, I shoved off from shore and started paddling as hard as I could. The adrenaline coursing through my veins gave me an almost superhuman burst of speed. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw their motorboat rapidly gaining on me. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. I knew I couldn't outrun a motorboat in my canoe, but I had one advantage: my extensive knowledge of the area from poring over maps before my trip. There was a narrow channel up ahead that led to a maze-like section of interconnected small lakes and islands. If I could make it there, I might have a chance of losing them. I dug my paddle into the water with every ounce of strength I had, my muscles burning with the effort. The sound of their boat grew louder behind me. Just as I thought they were about to overtake me, I made a sharp turn into the channel. It was barely wide enough for my canoe to fit through. I heard cursing and the revving of their engine as they were forced to slow down. The channel opened up into a confusing network of tiny islands and winding waterways. I zigzagged between them, taking random turns in an effort to throw off my pursuers. The shouts of the men echoed off the rocky shorelines, but I couldn't tell how close they were. My lungs were on fire, and my arms felt like lead, but terror kept me going. After what felt like hours of frantic paddling, I no longer heard the sound of their boat. I allowed myself to slow down slightly, straining my ears for any sign of them. The forest was eerily silent, except for my labored breathing. I rounded a bend and found myself in a small, secluded cove surrounded by dense vegetation. Spotting a low-hanging branch, I guided my canoe underneath it and tried to still my ragged breathing. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Just as I started to think I had lost them, I heard the faint sound of a motor in the distance. My whole body tensed as it grew closer. Through the leaves, I caught a glimpse of their boat passing by the entrance to the cove. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest movement would give away my position. To my immense relief, they continued past without noticing me. I stayed hidden in that spot for what must have been hours, too terrified to move. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the water, I finally felt it might be safe to leave my hiding place. With trembling arms, I carefully paddled out of the cove. I had no idea where I was in relation to my planned route, but at that point, all I cared about was getting as far away from there as possible. I paddled through the night, jumping at every snapping twig or splash in the water. By the time dawn broke, I was utterly exhausted, but I had covered a significant distance. I finally allowed myself to stop and rest on a small beach, collapsing onto the sand in relief. As my fear slowly subsided, my mind raced with questions. Who were those men? What were they doing out there? Given their reaction to being seen, it had to be something illegal. Drug smuggling, perhaps, or weapons trafficking. The remote location would be perfect for that kind of operation. I knew I had to report what I had seen to the authorities. After consulting my map, I realized I was only a few hours' paddle from a ranger station. I forced my aching body back into the canoe and set off, constantly looking over my shoulder in paranoia. When I finally reached the ranger station, I must have looked like a madman, wild-eyed, disheveled, and babbling about armed men chasing me through the wilderness. To their credit, the Rangers took my story seriously. They immediately radioed for backup and took down every detail I could remember. In the following days, as I gave statements to various law enforcement agencies, I learned that there had been suspicions of illegal activity in that area for some time. My encounter had finally provided them with concrete evidence to investigate further. Part of me felt proud to have assisted in uncovering a potential criminal operation, but mostly I was just grateful to be alive. It's been months since that harrowing day in the Boundary Waters, but I still have nightmares about being chased through those labyrinthine waterways. The sound of a motorboat is enough to make my heart race. I haven't been able to bring myself to go on another solo trip since then. The wilderness I once saw as a peaceful refuge now holds a hint of danger that I can't shake. Sometimes I find myself obsessively scanning the news, looking for any reports of arrests or busts in the Boundary Waters area. But so far, there's been nothing. I can't help but wonder if those men are still out there, continuing their shadowy operations in the remote wilderness. And I wonder if they're looking for me, the lone paddler who stumbled upon their secret and got away. One thing's for certain, I'll never forget the day that my peaceful canoe trip turned into a life-or-death chase through the pristine waters of Minnesota. It's a stark reminder that even in the most beautiful places, danger can be lurking just around the bend. I was deep in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, conducting field research on the impact of climate change on alpine ecosystems. As an environmental scientist, I'd spent years studying these delicate habitats, but nothing could have prepared me for the terrifying ordeal I was about to face. It was a crisp autumn morning when I set out from my remote campsite, my backpack loaded with equipment and supplies for a day of data collection. The air was thin and brisk at this elevation, and my breath formed little clouds as I hiked up the rugged terrain. I'd been in this particular area for about a week, methodically working my way through a grid of sampling sites. As I crested a ridge, I paused to take in the breathtaking vista before me, jagged peaks stretching as far as the eye could see, their slopes blanketed in evergreens and dotted with patches of early snow. It was a view that never failed to fill me with awe, no matter how many times I'd seen it. But something caught my eye that didn't belong in this pristine wilderness. In a valley below, partially obscured by trees, I spotted what looked like heavy machinery. Curiosity piqued. I pulled out my binoculars for a closer look. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a mining operation, and judging by its location deep in a protected wilderness area, it had to be illegal. I could see excavators and dump trucks carving into the mountainside, leaving ugly gashes in the land. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. Who was behind this? How long had it been going on? I knew I needed to document this and report it to the authorities. Pulling out my camera, I started snapping photos, zooming in as much as I could to capture details of the equipment and layout of the site. I was so focused on getting clear shots that I didn't notice the ATV approaching until it was almost upon me. The engine's growl snapped me to attention, and I whirled around to see two burly men in hard hats speeding towards me. One of them shouted and pointed in my direction. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized I'd been spotted. Pure instinct took over. I shoved my camera into my pack and took off running, crashing through the underbrush. I could hear the ATV engine roaring behind me as they gave chase. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, my lungs burning in the thin mountain air. I veered off the hiking trail, hoping the dense forest would slow down my pursuers. The sound of the ATV faded, replaced by shouts and the crashing of footsteps. They were on foot now, too, but I had a head start. My mind raced as I ran, trying to formulate a plan. I needed to lose them and find a way to contact help. But I was miles from the nearest town, with no cell service in these remote mountains. My satellite phone was back at my campsite. I was on my own. I spotted a small stream ahead and splashed across it, hoping to throw them off my trail. The icy water soaked through my hiking boots, but I couldn't worry about that now. I scrambled up the opposite bank and kept running. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes of frantic flight, I paused behind a large boulder to catch my breath and listen. The forest was eerily quiet, no sounds of pursuit that I could detect. But I knew they had to still be searching for me. I needed to find a place to hide and regroup. Scanning my surroundings, I spotted a dense thicket of pines on a slope above me. It looked like it might offer some concealment. Moving as quietly as I could, I made my way up to it and wormed my way into the middle of the grove. Huddled among the pine needles, I tried to slow my racing heart and think through my options. I had some food and water in my pack, along with basic survival gear. But with those men searching for me, I didn't dare try to make it back to my campsite. My best bet was to lay low until nightfall, then try to make my way to the ranger station I knew was about 15 miles to the east. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was alone in the wilderness, being hunted by men who clearly had something to hide, men who might be willing to do anything to keep their illegal operations secret. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The rest of the day passed in tense, watchful silence. I dozed fitfully, starting at every snapping twig or rustle of wind. As dusk fell, I heard voices in the distance. My pursuers were still out there sweeping the area. I curled up tighter in my hiding spot, hardly daring to breathe. Finally, true darkness settled over the mountains. It was time to move. I eased out of the thicket, my muscles stiff and aching from hours of tensed immobility. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate by as I set off eastward, using the stars to guide me. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could through the night, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. The forest was alive with small noises, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the underbrush. Each sound sent a jolt of fear through me. Was it just normal nighttime forest sounds, or were my hunters closing in? After several hours of anxious travel, I reached the edge of a steep ravine. In the dim moonlight, I could just make out a rushing river far below. I knew this had to be Elk Creek, which meant the ranger station wasn't far now. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a new wave of tension. This would be the most dangerous part of my journey. There was only one bridge across the ravine for miles in either direction. If my pursuers had any sense, they'd have someone watching it. But I had no choice. It was my only way across, and I had to risk it. I approached the bridge with utmost caution, every sense on high alert. It was an old wooden suspension bridge, swaying slightly in the night breeze. As I drew closer, my heart nearly stopped. I could just make out the silhouette of a man standing guard at the far end. For a moment, I froze in panic. Then an idea struck me. I picked up a large rock and lobbed it into the woods off to my right, as far as I could throw. It crashed through the branches with a satisfying amount of noise. The guard's head snapped towards the sound. He shouted something I couldn't make out, then moved off the bridge to investigate. This was my chance. I darted onto the bridge, wincing at every creak of the wooden planks beneath my feet. I was about halfway across when I heard an angry yell behind me. I'd been spotted. Abandoning all attempts at stealth, I broke into a sprint. The bridge swayed alarmingly beneath me as I ran. Gunshots rang out, splintering the wood near my feet. Blind terror gave me wings as I flew across the last section of the bridge and dove into the cover of the trees on the far side. I ran like I'd never run before, putting everything I had into one final push for safety. My lungs felt like they were on fire, my legs trembling with exhaustion. But I could see lights ahead through the trees, the ranger station. I burst out of the woods into the station's parking lot, startling a ranger who was just arriving for the early morning shift. I must have looked like a madman, wild-eyed, covered in cuts and bruises, gasping for breath. But I managed to choke out enough of an explanation for him to usher me inside and call for backup. The next few hours passed in a blur of ranger and police interviews, medical checks and phone calls to my research team to let them know I was safe. By the time the sun rose, a full investigation was underway. I learned later that they raided the illegal mining operation, arresting several people and shutting it down for good. As I sit here now, days later, trying to make sense of it all, I'm still shaken. The wilderness I love, that I've devoted my life to studying and protecting, suddenly seems like a much darker and more dangerous place. But I'm also filled with a fierce determination. Those men tried to silence me, to protect their illegal and destructive operation. Instead, they've only strengthened my resolve to continue my work, to be a voice for these fragile mountain ecosystems that can't speak for themselves. I know I was lucky to escape, and the events of that terrifying day will haunt me for a long time to come. But I also know I'll be back out there soon, continuing my research. Because now, more than ever, I understand how vital it is to protect these wild places, not just from climate change, but from the very real and immediate threat of human greed and exploitation. It started out as a typical day. I woke up before dawn, packed my gear, and headed out into the swamp. The air was thick with humidity, and I could hear the buzzing of insects all around me. I set up my tripod near a small clearing, waiting patiently for the perfect light to filter through the cypress trees. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow across the water, I noticed something odd in the distance. Through my telephoto lens, I could make out what looked like a group of men loading large crates onto an airboat. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just local fishermen or tour guides getting an early start. But as I zoomed in further, I realized something wasn't right. The men were all dressed in dark clothing, moving quickly and furtively. The crates they were loading looked heavy, and I could see that some of them had strange markings on the side. My heart started racing as I realized I might be witnessing some kind of illegal operation. I knew I should probably just pack up and leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. I started snapping photos, trying to capture as much detail as I could. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins, and I felt like an undercover agent on some secret mission. That's when everything went wrong. I must have made some kind of noise, or maybe one of them spotted the reflection from my camera lens. Suddenly, I heard shouting, and I saw two of the men pointing in my direction. Panic set in as I realized they had spotted me. I quickly grabbed my camera and tripod, not even bothering to pack them away properly. As I turned to run, I could hear the roar of an airboat engine starting up. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I ran blindly through the swamp, branches whipping at my face and mud sucking at my boots. The sound of the airboat was getting closer, and I knew I had to find a way to hide. I spotted a fallen tree partially submerged in the murky water and made a split-second decision. Taking a deep breath, I plunged into the water, trying not to think about the alligators and snakes that could be lurking beneath the surface. I wedged myself under the fallen tree, leaving just enough space to breathe. The water was cold and smelled of decay, but I forced myself to stay still. The airboat roared past my hiding spot, so close I could feel the vibrations in the water. I heard men shouting to each other, their voices angry and determined. I closed my eyes and prayed they wouldn't find me. For what felt like hours, I stayed hidden in that disgusting water. My muscles were cramping, and I was shivering uncontrollably. Every sound made me flinch: the splash of a fish, the cry of a bird, the rustle of leaves in the wind. I was convinced that at any moment, rough hands would grab me and drag me out of my hiding place. Finally, when I couldn't bear it any longer, I cautiously peeked out from my hiding spot. The swamp was quiet, with no sign of the men or their airboat. Still, I was terrified to move. What if they were waiting for me to come out? Slowly, painfully, I extracted myself from the water. I was covered in mud, and who knows what else. My clothes were soaked, and I had lost one of my boots in the muck. But I was alive. I didn't dare go back for my equipment. Instead, I started making my way towards where I thought the road might be. Every step was agony. My feet were cut and bleeding, and I was constantly on edge, expecting to hear the sound of an approaching airboat at any moment. As I stumbled through the swamp, my mind was racing. What had I witnessed? Drug smugglers, human traffickers. Whatever it was, I knew it was big, and I knew those men would stop at nothing to keep their operations secret. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached the road. I must have looked like some kind of swamp monster, covered in mud and vegetation, limping along the shoulder. A car pulled over. An older couple who looked both concerned and slightly terrified of me. I babbled out some story about getting lost while hiking, and they kindly offered me a ride to the nearest ranger station. At the station, I told the rangers everything. They seemed skeptical at first, but when I mentioned the markings on the crates, their demeanor changed. They quickly called in some kind of special unit, and soon I was being questioned by serious-looking men in suits. I told them everything I could remember: the location, the number of men, the descriptions of the crates. I even drew rough sketches of what I had seen. They seemed particularly interested in the markings I had noticed on the crates. As I was talking, I suddenly remembered my camera. In all the chaos, I had completely forgotten about the photos I had taken. My heart sank as I realized that my only concrete evidence was probably still out there in the swamp, likely ruined by water damage, even if the men hadn't found and destroyed it. The authorities assured me they would investigate thoroughly, but I could tell they were frustrated by the lack of hard evidence. They took my contact information and told me they would be in touch if they needed anything else. I was put up in a local motel for the night, under the watchful eye of a plainclothes officer. As I lay in bed, unable to sleep, every sound made me jump. The air conditioning unit sounded like an airboat engine. The voices in the parking lot sounded like angry men searching for me. The next day, I gave a formal statement to the police and was finally allowed to go home. But as I boarded my flight, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. What if those men had seen my face? What if they came looking for me? It's been weeks now, and I still haven't heard anything from the authorities. I checked the news obsessively, looking for any reports of arrests or busts in the Everglades, but there's nothing. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if the stress and the heat had caused some kind of hallucination. But then I'll catch a glimpse of the cuts on my feet, still healing, or I'll wake up in a cold sweat. the sound of airboat engines roaring in my ears, and I know it was real. Whatever I stumbled upon that day in the Everglades, it was something big, something dangerous. I haven't picked up my camera since that day. The thought of going back into nature, of being alone and vulnerable, terrifies me now. I know I should probably see a therapist or something, but I'm afraid to talk about it. What if those men are still out there, still looking for the witness who could bring down their operation? So I stay quiet, I stay watchful, and I wait. Every time my phone rings or there's a knock at the door, my heart races. Will it be the authorities telling me they've made an arrest? Or will it be something much, much worse? I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. The Everglades took something from me that day, not just my equipment or my sense of security, but a piece of my soul. The beauty I once saw in nature has been tainted by the darkness I witnessed. All I can do now is hope that someday, somehow, the truth will come out. That whatever criminal enterprise I stumbled upon will be brought to justice. Until then, I'll keep looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, and wondering if I'll ever be able to forget the day I became an accidental witness to something I was never meant to see. I was so excited for our family camping trip to the Redwoods. My wife and I had been planning it for months, a chance to get away from the hustle of daily life and spend some quality time with our kids in nature. We loaded up the minivan with tents, sleeping bags, coolers full of food, and way too much stuff as usual. The drive up the California coast was beautiful, with the kids actually getting along in the back seat for once as they took in the ocean views. When we arrived at the campground nestled among the towering redwood trees, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the earthy scent of the forest. We found our campsite and got to work setting up our tents and gear. The kids were thrilled to help hammer in tent stakes and gather kindling for the fire. My wife and I exchanged content smiles as we watched them explore the campsite with such enthusiasm. As dusk settled in, we gathered around the crackling campfire to roast hot dogs and make s'mores. The kids were in heaven, sticky marshmallow covering their faces as they giggled and told silly stories. Even our moody teenager seemed to be enjoying herself, the glow of the fire softening her usually sullen expression. I breathed in deeply, savoring the moment and feeling grateful for this time with my family. We turned in relatively early, tired from the long drive and setup. I made sure the food was securely stored in the bear box, not wanting to take any chances, even though the ranger said bear sightings were rare. Snuggled into our sleeping bags, the sounds of the forest lulled us to sleep. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through the redwood canopy far above. I'm not sure what time it was when I was jolted awake by voices outside our tent. At first, in my groggy state, I thought it might be neighboring campers, but as I became more alert, I realized the voices sounded angry and aggressive. My heart started racing as I heard heavy footsteps circling our campsite. "I know I heard voices over here," a gruff male voice said. "There's got to be campers." "Check the tents," another man replied. "Maybe they got something worth taking." Ice ran through my veins as I realized we were about to be robbed, or worse. I quickly shook my wife awake, pressing my finger to my lips to signal her to be quiet. Her eyes went wide with fear as she registered the voices outside. We could hear our kids stirring in the other tent, no doubt also woken by the commotion. "Daddy?" our youngest called out sleepily. I winced, knowing the men outside had surely heard. "Well, well, looks like we found ourselves some company," one of them said with a chilling laugh. Adrenaline surging, I knew I had to act fast to protect my family. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight we keep by the tent door, gripping it tightly as a potential weapon. "Stay here," I whispered to my wife. If anything happens, take the kids and run for the car." Heart pounding, I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the moonlit clearing. 3 rough-looking men stood there, menacing grins on their faces as they took in the scene. They were dirty and unkempt, with wild eyes that spoke of desperation. "Evening, fellas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" "Yeah, you can start by handing over any cash and valuables," the largest man growled, taking a step towards me. I raised the flashlight, clicking it on to momentarily blind them with the bright beam. "I think you boys better move along," I said with more confidence than I felt. "There's nothing for you here." One of the men lunged forward suddenly, trying to grab the flashlight. I swung it hard, connecting solidly with his jaw. He stumbled back with a cry of pain and anger. The other 2 advanced on me, and I braced myself for a fight, knowing I was sorely outnumbered. Just then, a booming voice echoed through the trees. "What's going on here?" A huge, bearded man emerged from the shadows, holding a massive walking stick. The 3 would-be robbers froze, clearly caught off guard by this new arrival. "These men were just leaving," I said firmly, locking eyes with the bearded stranger and silently willing him to play along. To my immense relief, he nodded and stepped up beside me. "That right, boys? Time for you to hit the trail." The 3 men glanced at each other, clearly reassessing the situation now that the odds had shifted. After a tense moment, the leader spat on the ground. "Ain't worth the trouble," he muttered. "Let's go." We watched in taut silence as they slunk away into the darkness. Only when their footsteps had faded did I let out the breath I'd been holding. "Thank you," I said to the bearded stranger, my voice shaky with leftover adrenaline. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." He waved off my thanks. "Heard the commotion from my campsite over yonder. Couldn't just sit by. You folks all right?" I nodded, though my racing heart said otherwise. "We will be. I should check on my family. I'll keep watch out here for a spell. Make sure those yahoos don't come back," he offered. Gratefully, I ducked back into the tent where my wife was huddled with our children, all 3 of them wide-eyed and trembling. I gathered them in my arms, murmuring reassurances, even as my own hands shook. We didn't sleep much the rest of the night. At first light, we packed up camp in record time, eager to put distance between us and the events of the night. Before we left, I sought out our bearded savior to thank him again. He brushed it off gruffly, but I could see the warmth in his eyes. "You did right by your family," he said, "but best report this to the rangers on your way out. Sounds like those boys might be up to no good in these parts." I nodded, already planning to do just that. As we drove away from the campground, my wife reached over and squeezed my hand. "You were so brave," she said softly. I tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. The fear and tension of the night still gripped me. What if that man hadn't shown up? What if I hadn't been able to protect them? The what-ifs crowded my mind, refusing to let go. We did stop at the ranger station to report what had happened. The ranger looked grim as he took down the details. "We've had a few reports of suspicious activity lately," he admitted. "Might be some fugitives hiding out in the area. We'll step up patrols." As we continued our drive home, the majestic beauty of the redwoods felt tainted somehow. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the realization of how quickly a peaceful family vacation could turn into a nightmare. It's been weeks now, and I still wake up some nights in a cold sweat, imagining those men circling our tent. The kids seem to have bounced back, but I catch my wife double-checking the locks more often. We're all a little more wary, a little less trusting of strangers. I'm grateful, of course, that we all made it out safely, but part of me mourns for the sense of security we lost that night. The redwoods will always hold a mix of awe and unease for me now, a reminder of nature's beauty, but also its potential dangers. Sometimes I wonder about that bearded stranger who came to our aid. Was he really just a fellow camper, or something more? In my darker moments, I imagine he was some kind of guardian angel. It seems impossible that he showed up at just the right moment otherwise. I don't know if we'll ever go camping again. The thought of being so exposed, so far from help, makes my palms sweat. But I also don't want fear to rule our lives. Maybe someday we'll find a way to reclaim that sense of adventure and wonder in the great outdoors. For now, though, I'm content to appreciate nature from the safety of well-populated hiking trails and scenic overlooks. One thing's for certain, I'll never take the peace and safety of our home for granted again. Every night as I lock up and check on my sleeping children, I say a silent prayer of thanks. We may have lost some innocence in those woods, but we gained a deeper appreciation for each other and the precious gift of safety. That night in the redwoods changed us all in ways I'm still trying to understand, but we survived. We're together, and for that, I'm endlessly grateful. Whatever the future holds, I know we can face it as long as we have each other. And maybe, just maybe, there are more guardian angels out there than we realize, watching over us in our darkest moments. I was so excited for our camping trip to Texas Hill Country. My 3 best friends and I had been planning it for months, a chance to get away from the city, enjoy nature, and have some adventures together. We packed up my old Jeep with tents, coolers full of food and beer, and all our gear. The drive out from Austin was beautiful, winding through rolling hills covered in oak and cedar trees. We found a secluded spot to set up camp near a creek, about a 30-minute hike from where we parked the Jeep. It seemed perfect, peaceful and isolated, with a babbling brook nearby and a clearing for our tents and campfire. We spent the afternoon setting everything up, collecting firewood, and exploring the area a bit. As the sun started to set, we got a fire going and cracked open some beers, laughing and joking around. Everything was going great until we heard the sound of engines revving in the distance. At first, we didn't think much of it, probably just some locals out four-wheeling or something. But then the noise got closer, and we could hear shouting and whooping. Suddenly, 3 huge pickup trucks came crashing through the trees into our campsite. They skidded to a stop, kicking up dust and leaves. 6 or 7 guys piled out of the trucks. They were all big, burly dudes wearing camo and trucker hats. A couple had rifles slung over their shoulders. My heart started racing as they approached us. The biggest guy, who seemed to be their leader, stepped forward. "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" he growled. "This is private property. You city boys ain't welcome round these parts." I tried to stay calm and defuse the situation. "I'm sorry. We didn't realize this was private land. We'll pack up and leave right away." The leader sneered. "Damn right you will. But first, we're going to teach you a lesson about trespassing." Before we could react, the men started trashing our campsite. They kicked over our tents, dumped out our coolers, and stomped on our gear. One guy picked up my friend Mike's expensive camera and smashed it on a rock. We were too terrified to do anything but watch in shock. When they were done destroying our stuff, the leader got right in my face. I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Now get the hell out of here and don't come back. Next time we catch you out here, we won't be so nice." They piled back in their trucks and roared off into the darkness, leaving us standing stunned in the wreckage of our campsite. We were shaken and unsure what to do. It was pitch black out, and we were miles from the nearest town. We decided to salvage what we could and try to hike back to the Jeep in the morning. We didn't sleep at all that night. Every snapping twig or rustle in the bushes made us jump. I kept imagining those trucks coming back. As soon as the first light of dawn appeared, we packed up what was left of our gear and started hiking out. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when we heard engines again. My stomach dropped. Through the trees, I saw those same trucks speeding along a dirt road that ran parallel to the trail we were on. They must have spotted us because they suddenly veered off the road and started plowing through the brush straight for us. "Run!" I yelled. We took off sprinting through the woods. I could hear the trucks crashing through the trees behind us. Branches whipped at my face as I ran. My lungs were burning. I glanced back and saw the trucks getting closer. They were going to run us down. Suddenly, a voice called out from the side, "Over here! Quick!" I looked and saw an older man waving frantically at us from the porch of a small cabin. Without hesitating, we changed course and ran towards him. He ushered us inside and slammed the door just as the truck skidded to a stop outside. "You boys picked the wrong place to go camping," the man said grimly. He introduced himself as Jack and explained that he'd lived in these hills his whole life. The men chasing us were part of a clan of locals who didn't take kindly to outsiders. They'd gotten worse in recent years, harassing campers and hikers to keep people away from their land. We could hear the men outside, shouting and pounding on the walls of the cabin. Jack calmly walked over to a gun rack and took down a shotgun. He racked a shell into the chamber, and the noise outside immediately stopped. "You boys best move along now," Jack called out. "These fellas are under my protection." There was some angry muttering, then the sound of engines starting up. We watched through the windows as the trucks drove away. Jack made us some coffee and let us use his phone to call for a tow truck to get the Jeep. He said he'd drive us into town once it arrived. As we waited, he told us more about the growing hostility from some of the locals towards outsiders. There had been more incidents like ours recently. He was worried someone was going to end up seriously hurt if it kept escalating. When the tow truck finally arrived, Jack escorted us back to the Jeep. He followed behind us all the way into the nearest town to make sure we got there safely. Before we parted ways, he gave us his number and told us to call any time if we needed help in the area again. The whole drive back to Austin, we were on edge, jumping at every car that got too close or lingered behind us too long. I kept replaying the terrifying chase through the woods in my mind. If Jack hadn't been there, I don't want to think about what might have happened. It's been a few months now, but I still have nightmares about those trucks bearing down on us. I can't shake the feeling of utter helplessness as they trashed our campsite. I used to love camping and hiking, but now the thought of being out in remote wilderness fills me with dread. My friends and I don't talk about that trip much. I think we're all still processing how close we came to real danger. I'm grateful to Jack for saving us, but his stories about the growing hostility in the area are deeply unsettling. It makes me wonder how many other incidents like ours have happened that we don't hear about. Those beautiful, rugged hills now feel tainted by the ugliness we experienced. I doubt I'll ever go back, but I worry about other unsuspecting campers stumbling into similar danger. Sometimes I find myself obsessively checking news stories from that region, looking for reports of missing hikers or violent encounters. So far, nothing has made the news, but I can't shake the feeling that something bigger and darker is brewing out there in those hills. I just hope someone puts a stop to it before innocent people get hurt, or worse. We arrived at the campsite on a crisp autumn afternoon. The leaves were changing colors, painting the forest in vibrant reds and golds. As we set up our tent and gathered firewood, I actually started to enjoy myself. Jake and I fell into an easy rapport, swapping stories and cracking jokes like we used to as kids. As night fell, we sat around the campfire roasting marshmallows and catching up. Jake told me about his new job, and I filled him in on my recent breakup. It felt good to reconnect after so long. Around midnight, we doused the fire and crawled into our sleeping bags. I woke suddenly in the pitch black, unsure what had disturbed me. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I heard it. A rustling sound outside the tent, probably just a raccoon or something, I told myself. But then I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps circling our campsite. "Jake," I whispered urgently, shaking my brother awake. "There's someone out there." He sat up groggily. "What? Are you sure?" Before I could respond, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It sounded almost human, but distorted and feral. Jake and I looked at each other in wide-eyed terror. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear labored breathing and guttural grunts. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Suddenly, a face appeared pressed against the tent fabric. Wild eyes, matted hair, yellowed teeth bared in a twisted grin. I let out an involuntary yelp of fear. "Run!" Jake yelled, unzipping the tent. We burst out into the darkness, not even grabbing our shoes. I could hear the creature, the man, crashing through the underbrush behind us. His unhinged laughter echoed through the trees. We sprinted blindly through the forest, branches whipping our faces and rocks cutting into our bare feet. I had no idea which direction we were going. All I knew was that we had to get away from that thing chasing us. After what felt like hours of running, we finally stopped to catch our breath. I doubled over, gasping for air, my lungs burning. We listened intently, but heard nothing except the usual nighttime forest sounds. "I think we lost him," Jake panted. "What the hell was that?" I asked between gulps of air. Jake shook his head. "I don't know, but we need to find help." We started walking, hoping to find a road or some sign of civilization. The adrenaline was wearing off and the reality of our situation was setting in. We were lost in the woods in the middle of the night, being hunted by some deranged maniac. Every snapping twig made us jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. I kept imagining that twisted face appearing suddenly in front of us. The fear was all-consuming. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, we stumbled upon a dirt road. We followed it, praying it would lead us to safety. After about a mile, we saw a small building up ahead, a ranger station. We pounded on the door frantically. A sleepy-looking park ranger answered, alarmed by our haggard appearance. We spilled out our story in a frenzied jumble. The ranger ushered us inside and called for backup. The authorities scoured the area but found no sign of our attacker. They discovered our ransacked campsite, but the only prints they found were our own. If it weren't for our cuts and bruises, they might not have believed us. Jake and I gave our statements to the police. They told us attacks like this were extremely rare in the area. They would keep investigating, but warned us they may never find the perpetrator. It's been months since that night, but I still have nightmares about those wild eyes and yellowed teeth. I wake up in a cold sweat, imagining hot breath on the back of my neck. Jake and I have grown closer through our shared trauma, but we both jump at unexpected noises and avoid the outdoors. I've scoured news reports and online forums, looking for any similar incidents in those woods, but there's nothing. No missing persons, no other attacks. It's like that feral man materialized out of nowhere just to terrorize us, then vanished back into the shadows of the forest. Sometimes I wonder if we imagined the whole thing. But then I look at the scars on my feet from running barefoot through the woods, and I know it was real. Something was out there that night, something that shouldn't exist in our rational modern world. I don't know if it was a deranged hermit or something more sinister. All I know is that I'll never set foot in those woods again. Some dark things are better left alone in the wilderness. I just pray that whatever hunted us that night stays there and never ventures out to stalk new victims. The experience changed me. I'm more cautious now, always looking over my shoulder. Loud noises make me flinch. I have trouble sleeping without a light on. Part of me is still running through those dark woods, heart pounding, waiting for those twisted features to emerge from the shadows. Jake and I don't talk about it much anymore, but sometimes I'll catch his eye, and I know he's remembering too. The fear, the helplessness, the animal panic of being prey. In those moments, we share a look of understanding. We survived something that defies explanation, and it binds us together in ways I never expected. I've tried to move on with my life, but the memories of that night are always there, lurking in the recesses of my mind. The smallest things can trigger a flashback. The rustling of leaves, a distant scream, the smell of campfire smoke. In those moments, I'm transported back to the terror of being hunted through the dark forest. I've seen therapists trying to process the trauma. They offer coping mechanisms and rational explanations. But how do you rationalize something so irrational? How do you explain the inexplicable? Sometimes I find myself obsessively researching local folklore and urban legends, searching for anything that might shed light on what we encountered. Wendigos, skinwalkers, feral humans. I've gone down every rabbit hole. But nothing quite fits what we experienced. I've become something of an amateur expert on survival skills and self-defense. I never want to feel that vulnerable again. My apartment is filled with emergency supplies and escape plans. Some might call it paranoia, but to me it's necessary precaution. Jake has dealt with it differently. He threw himself into his work, barely taking time off. I worry about him bottling it all up, but I understand the need to stay busy, to keep the memories at bay. We've made a pact never to speak publicly about what happened. Who would believe us anyway? But sometimes I wonder if staying silent is the right choice. What if that thing is still out there? What if someone else encounters it, unprepared and unwarned? But then I remember the disbelief in the ranger's eyes, the skepticism from the police. Telling our story would only invite ridicule and doubt. So we keep it to ourselves, this dark secret that changed us forever. As time passes, the intensity of the memories fades slightly, but I know I'll never fully shake the impact of that night. It opened my eyes to how thin the veneer of civilization really is, how close we are to the primal terrors that lurked in our ancestors' nightmares. I still love my brother, and I'm grateful for the bond we've forged through this ordeal. But sometimes I wish we'd never gone on that camping trip. I wish I could forget those wild eyes in the darkness, that inhuman scream echoing through the trees. But wishes don't change reality. All I can do is move forward, carrying this experience with me, and hope that whatever was hunting us that night stays lost in the depths of the Pennsylvania woods, never to emerge again. I set out early on a crisp autumn morning, driving a few hours from Nashville into the heart of Cherokee National Forest. The fall colors were in full display, painting the landscape in vibrant reds and golds. As I hiked deeper into the wilderness with my backpack, I felt the stress of city life melting away. By late afternoon, I found the perfect secluded spot to set up camp near a bubbling stream. I pitched my tent, gathered firewood, and settled in to enjoy the serenity. As dusk fell, I sat by my small campfire, listening to the soothing sounds of nature all around me. Crickets chirped, owls hooted in the distance, and the stream gurgled nearby. I breathed in the fresh forest air, feeling truly at peace for the first time in months. But as night fully set in, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. The forest suddenly felt oppressively dark and silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the distinct sensation of being watched. I tried to shake it off as just my imagination running wild in the unfamiliar setting. I crawled into my tent around 10 p.m., zipping myself into my sleeping bag. Sleep didn't come easily as I tossed and turned, straining my ears at every little sound. Just as I was finally drifting off around midnight, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the leaves, circling my campsite. My blood ran cold. I lay frozen in terror, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps paused right outside my tent. Then I heard heavy breathing and what sounded like sniffing, as if something was trying to catch my scent. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. Suddenly, a beam of light cut through the darkness as a flashlight shone directly on my tent. I could see the silhouette of a tall figure through the thin fabric. A gravelly voice called out, "I know you're in there. Why don't you come on out and say hello?" Panic seized me. This was no forest ranger or fellow camper. Something about that voice chilled me to my core. I knew with absolute certainty that if I went outside, something horrible would happen to me. I stayed silent, desperately hoping the intruder would go away. But after a moment, I heard the sound of a zipper being slowly pulled down. To my horror, I realized it was the zipper of my tent. Somebody was trying to get in. Pure survival instinct took over. I burst out of my sleeping bag and grabbed my hiking boots and backpack. Just as a hand started to reach inside the tent, I slashed through the back wall with my pocket knife and tumbled out into the pitch-black forest. I took off running as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I could hear angry shouting and pounding footsteps in pursuit. Branches whipped at my face as I blindly crashed through the undergrowth. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but sheer terror kept me going. I had no idea where I was or which direction I was running. My only thought was to put as much distance as possible between me and my pursuer. After what felt like hours of frantic flight, I finally slowed to catch my breath. The forest was eerily silent. I strained my ears but couldn't hear any sign of pursuit. Utterly exhausted and disoriented, I slumped against a tree, trying to figure out what to do next. I was lost in the middle of the wilderness in the dead of night, with some kind of maniac potentially still hunting me. I didn't even have my shoes on. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed a faint glow through the trees that looked like it might be moonlight reflecting off water. I decided to head in that direction, hoping it might lead to a river or lake where I could better get my bearings. I stumbled through the forest for what felt like another hour, my bare feet aching from the rough terrain. Finally, I broke through the tree line and found myself on the shore of a small lake. The nearly full moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery light across the still water. In the distance, I could just make out what looked like a road winding along the far shore. A surge of hope gave me renewed energy. If I could just make it to that road, I might have a chance of flagging down help. I started to work my way around the lakeshore as quickly as I could manage. The going was slow and treacherous in the dark. Halfway there, I heard a twig snap in the forest behind me. I whirled around and saw a beam of light sweeping through the trees. The footsteps were back. Abandoning all caution, I splashed into the frigid lake water and started swimming. It was agonizingly slow going in my waterlogged clothes, but pure adrenaline pushed me forward. I could hear shouting from the shore, but I didn't dare look back. By some miracle, I made it across. I dragged myself out of the water, gasping and shivering violently. Through blurry eyes, I saw headlights approaching on the road. I stumbled towards them, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and an older man rolled down his window looking alarmed. "Good Lord, son, what happened to you?" I could barely form words through my chattering teeth. "Please, help. Someone after me." The man's eyes widened as he glanced past me towards the lake. Without another word, he reached across and flung open the passenger door. "Get in, quick!" I practically dove into the car. As we sped off down the winding forest road, I twisted around to look out the back window. In the fading taillights, I caught a glimpse of a tall, shadowy figure standing at the water's edge, staring after us. The kind stranger, whose name was Bill, couldn't believe my story. He drove me straight to the nearest police station, where I gave a statement to some very skeptical officers. They sent out patrols to search the area, but found no sign of my campsite or the mysterious pursuer. In the light of day, it all seemed surreal, like a nightmare I'd somehow lived through. But the cuts and bruises covering my body were all too real. I never did go back to retrieve my abandoned gear. The thought of those woods still fills me with dread. It's been 5 years, and I still have no explanation for what happened that night. Was it just a deranged person who happened to be in those woods, or something more sinister? I've never been camping again, and loud noises or unexpected movements still make me jump. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined or exaggerated parts of it in my panic. But then I remember the pure terror I felt, the absolute certainty that if that thing had caught me, I would not have survived. Those footsteps haunted my nightmares for months. I'm sharing this story now as a warning to others. Nature can be beautiful and healing, but it can also harbor dark and inexplicable dangers. If you venture into the wilderness alone, always trust your instincts. And if you ever feel that prickling sensation of being watched in the forest at night, run. Don't hesitate. Don't second-guess yourself. Just run. I was lucky to escape with my life that night in the Tennessee woods. Others might not be so fortunate. Whatever was hunting me is still out there somewhere, and the thought of that still chills me to this day. I had rented a small cabin deep in the forests of western Maine, miles from the nearest town. The first few days were blissful. I hiked the trails, breathed in the crisp autumn air, and relished the solitude. But on the fourth day, everything changed. I set out early that morning for a long hike, planning to explore some of the more remote areas around the cabin. The forest was quiet, except for the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional bird call. As I ventured further from the main trails, I started to notice something odd. Here and there I'd spot strange metal contraptions partially hidden in the underbrush. At first I thought they might be some kind of research equipment, but as I examined one more closely, my blood ran cold. It was a steel jaw trap, the kind used by fur trappers to catch animals. These brutal devices were illegal in Maine, for good reason. They caused immense suffering, often maiming animals who would die slow, agonizing deaths. I was furious that someone would set these cruel traps in this pristine wilderness. I decided to disarm as many as I could find. For the next hour, I carefully sprung traps and marked their locations on my GPS to report later. That's when I heard voices in the distance. I froze, suddenly realizing how far I was from my cabin or any marked trails. The voices grew closer, gruff male voices using crude language. I caught fragments about checking trap lines and disappointed with the day's catch. My heart started racing. These must be the illegal trappers. If they caught me disarming their traps, there's no telling what they might do. I crouched low, and started to make my way through the underbrush as quietly as possible, hoping to circle wide around them. But I wasn't quiet enough. A twig snapped under my foot, and the voices suddenly went silent. Then I heard one of them growl. "What was that?" Sounded like someone's out there. Panic flooded through me. I abandoned all attempts at stealth and just ran. Crashes and shouts erupted behind me as they started to pursue. I sprinted through the forest, branches whipping my face, my lungs burning. I had no idea which direction I was going, just desperately trying to put distance between myself and my pursuers. After what felt like an eternity of running, I finally had to stop, gasping for air. I couldn't hear them anymore, but I knew they must still be searching. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my GPS, trying to figure out where I was in relation to my cabin. To my horror, I realized I had run in completely the wrong direction. I was now miles from safety, in a part of the forest I didn't know at all. I tried to calm my breathing and think rationally. The smart move would be to quietly make my way back towards the cabin. But every snapping twig or rustle of leaves made me jump, convinced the trappers were right behind me. As the afternoon wore on, the shadows lengthened and the forest took on a menacing air. I was making slow progress, constantly backtracking and second-guessing my route. That's when I heard a sound that made my blood freeze, the baying of dogs. The trappers must have gone back for their hunting dogs to track me. The barking was still distant but getting closer. Abandoning all caution, I started to run again. Branches tore at my clothes and I tripped several times, but raw fear kept me going. The dogs sounded closer with every passing minute. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I burst into a small clearing and saw a dilapidated old cabin. It wasn't my rental, but at that point I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to hide. I scrambled up to the door, praying it would be unlocked. The rusted handle turned and I threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me. The cabin was dark and musty, clearly abandoned for years. But it had 4 walls and a roof, which was all I needed. I wedged an old chair under the door handle and retreated to the far corner, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. The baying of the dogs grew louder, then stopped abruptly. They must have lost my scent at the clearing. I heard distant shouts as the men argued about which way to go. Minutes dragged by like hours as I cowered in that gloomy cabin, terrified they would decide to search inside. But gradually, the voices faded. Still, I was too scared to move. I stayed huddled in that corner as the light outside dimmed into twilight, then darkness. Every creak of the old cabin made me flinch. I don't think I've ever felt so utterly alone and afraid in my life. It must have been close to midnight when I finally worked up the courage to leave. I eased the door open, my nerves on a knife's edge. But the forest was silent, except for the normal nighttime sounds of insects and owls. Using my GPS and flashlight, I painstakingly made my way back towards my rental cabin. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Twice I had to shut off my light and hide when I thought I heard voices, though it may have just been my paranoid imagination. I finally stumbled back to my cabin as the eastern sky was starting to lighten. I burst inside, locked the door, and collapsed on the bed, utterly drained. But I knew I couldn't rest yet. As soon as there was enough light, I threw my belongings in my car and got the hell out of there. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station and reported everything. They took my statement seriously and said they would investigate. I learned later that they did find evidence of illegal trapping operations, though the perpetrators were never caught. It's been months now, but I still have nightmares about being hunted through those dark woods. The terror of those hours alone in the forest, pursued by unseen threats, left a mark on me that I don't think will ever fully fade. I used to love the peace and solitude of nature. Now, the thought of being alone in the wilderness fills me with dread. I know rationally that what happened to me was a freak occurrence. Thousands of people enjoy the Maine forests every year without incident, but I can't shake the feeling that just beyond the tree line, something sinister is lurking. I've tried to tell myself that the trappers probably weren't as dangerous as I'd feared, that they likely would have just scared me off if they'd caught me. But in my darkest moments, I remember the cruel steel jaws of those traps and wonder what they would have done to the person interfering with their illegal operation. Would they have hurt me, left me injured in the wilderness, or worse? I'll never know for sure, and that uncertainty haunts me. I've tried therapy, meditation, even medication to deal with the anxiety and hypervigilance I've been left with. It's slowly getting better, but I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe in the forest again. I still love nature and the outdoors, but now I stick to well-traveled trails and popular camping areas. No more solo adventures in remote wilderness. The peace and freedom I used to feel in isolation has been replaced by a constant, nagging fear of what might be hiding just out of sight. I know my experience was extreme and unusual, but I think it tapped into a primal fear we all have, the terror of being pursued, of being vulnerable and alone in an uncaring wilderness. We like to think we've conquered nature, tamed the wild, but my experience reminded me of just how quickly that illusion of control can shatter. So I'm sharing my story as a reminder to always be prepared, to trust your instincts, and to respect the power and potential dangers of the natural world. The wilderness can be beautiful and restorative, but it can also be unforgiving to those who aren't careful. I learned that lesson the hard way, and it's one I'll never forget. I was always drawn to the wild, untamed beauty of Alaska. As an avid survivalist, I dreamed of testing my skills in its harsh wilderness for years. Finally, after months of meticulous planning, I set out on a solo expedition deep into the Alaskan backcountry. The first few days were exhilarating. I reveled in the pristine landscapes, the crisp air, the sense of true solitude. Each night I'd make camp, feeling a deep satisfaction as I put my hard-earned skills to use. This was what I'd trained for. On the fourth day, things changed. I was hiking through a densely wooded area when the hairs on the back of my neck suddenly stood up. I froze, every instinct screaming that I was being watched. Slowly, I turned and scanned the trees behind me. Nothing, but the feeling persisted. I picked up my pace, telling myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the unease. That night, as I huddled by my small fire, I heard a twig snap in the darkness beyond the firelight. My head snapped up, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out. No response, just the wind in the trees and the crackle of my fire. I told myself it was just an animal, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I broke camp early and set off at a brisk pace. I'd planned to spend another week out here, but now I just wanted to get back to civilization. As I hiked, that prickling sensation of being watched returned. This time when I spun around, I caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, a dark figure ducking behind a tree. "Hey!" I shouted. "I see you! Who's there?" Silence. I stood rooted to the spot, heart hammering. After a long moment, I heard footsteps crunching through the underbrush, moving away from me. I debated following, but fear kept me in place. Who the hell was out here, and why were they following me? I practically ran the rest of the day, constantly looking over my shoulder. That night, I didn't dare light a fire. I found a sheltered spot between some boulders and huddled there sleeplessly, gripping my hunting knife. Every snapping twig made me flinch. Just before dawn, I heard it. Footsteps, slowly circling my position. I held my breath, willing myself to be invisible. The footsteps paused right on the other side of the boulder I was pressed against. I could hear slow, measured breathing. Then a voice, low and gravelly. "I know you're there." I bolted. Scrambling out from my hiding spot, I took off running blindly through the pre-dawn forest. I could hear pursuit behind me, branches snapping as my stalker gave chase. I ran until my lungs burned, zigging and zagging through the trees. Finally, I burst out of the tree line onto the shore of a small lake. Without hesitation, I plunged into the frigid water and swam for the opposite shore. When I dragged myself out, gasping and shivering, there was no sign of pursuit. I didn't stop moving all day. By nightfall, I'd covered more ground than I had in the previous 2 days combined. I was utterly exhausted, but terror kept me going. I'd completely lost track of where I was. My only goal now was to find some sign of civilization, some way to get help. The next morning, I woke at first light and set off again. Around midday, I heard the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, the distant drone of an airplane engine. I sprinted toward a clearing I'd spotted earlier and started waving my arms frantically. The plane banked and began to descend. I sobbed with relief. It was a bush plane, apparently on a routine supply run to a remote village. The pilot was alarmed by my appearance, wild-eyed, filthy, clothes torn. I babbled out my story as he flew me to the nearest town with a proper airstrip. He radioed ahead, and there were police waiting when we landed. I spilled the whole story to the officers, my words tumbling out in a frantic jumble. They listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They took my statement, but it was clear they didn't really believe me. No, they hadn't had any other reports of stalkers in the area. Yes, they'd look into it, but I shouldn't worry. I was safe now. But I didn't feel safe. Even as I checked into a motel and took the longest, hottest shower of my life, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept the curtains drawn tight and jumped at every sound in the hallway. The next day, I booked the first flight back home I could get. As the plane took off, I stared down at the vast Alaskan wilderness scrolling by below. Somewhere down there was a man who had hunted me for days, a man no one believed existed. I've tried to put it behind me. I've told myself 100 times that I imagined it, that it was all in my head. But in my darkest moments, when I bolt awake in the middle of the night, I know the truth. He was real. He was out there. And sometimes I wonder, is he still looking for me? I haven't been back to Alaska. I probably never will. My days of solo wilderness expeditions are over. These days I stick to well-traveled trails and crowded campgrounds. It's not the same rush, but at least I can sleep at night. But I'll never forget those terrifying days in the Alaskan wilderness. The feeling of being hunted, of being utterly alone with an unknown threat lurking in the shadows. It's a primal fear, one that burrows deep into your bones. Sometimes I think about reaching out to other survivalists, warning them about what happened to me. But I know how it would sound. Hell, I can barely believe it myself some days. So I stay quiet, and I try to move on with my life. But every so often, I'll be walking down a crowded city street, and I'll get that old familiar prickle on the back of my neck, that certainty that someone is watching me, and for just a moment, I'm back there in those woods, running for my life from an unseen predator. I tell myself it's all in my head, that I'm safe now, surrounded by people and concrete and streetlights. But a small part of me wonders, did he somehow follow me home? Is he out there somewhere, biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what he started in those Alaskan woods. I don't know if I'll ever have answers. All I know is that my experience changed me forever. I went into those woods seeking adventure and a test of my skills. I came out a different person, jumpier, more paranoid, but also deeply grateful to be alive. To anyone reading this who might be planning their own solo expedition, be careful out there. The wilderness is beautiful, but it can also be dangerous in ways you'd never expect. And sometimes, the greatest threat isn't the harsh environment or wild animals. Sometimes, the monster is all too human. Stay safe out there, fellow adventurers. And if you ever get that feeling of being watched while you're alone in the backcountry, trust your instincts. It just might save your life. I was 3 weeks into my summer research project, studying the nesting habits of wading birds in the Florida Everglades. As a wildlife biology grad student, I jumped at the chance to spend 2 months camping out in the swamps, observing egrets and herons in their natural habitat. Little did I know that I'd soon be running for my life through those same swamps, pursued by something far more dangerous than alligators. That fateful day started like any other. I woke up just before dawn in my small tent, scarfed down a granola bar, and set out in my canoe to check on the rookeries I'd been monitoring. The air was thick with humidity and the calls of birds greeting the morning sun. I paddled quietly through the mangroves, not wanting to disturb the wildlife. After a few hours of observation and note-taking, I decided to explore a bit farther afield. There was an area to the northwest I hadn't surveyed yet, and I was curious to see if there were any nesting sites there. I steered my canoe through ever-narrowing channels, pushing aside hanging vines and ducking under low-hanging branches. The vegetation got thicker and thicker until I could barely see more than 20 feet ahead. Just as I was thinking of turning back, I noticed an odd smell on the breeze, acrid and chemical. Definitely not a natural swamp odor. Intrigued, I kept going, following my nose. Suddenly, the narrow channel opened up into a small clearing. What I saw there made my blood run cold. Several large tents and makeshift wooden structures had been erected on a raised patch of dry ground. Scattered around were dozens of plastic barrels and crates. And the smell, it was overwhelming now, burning my nostrils. With dawning horror, I realized I'd stumbled upon some kind of drug manufacturing operation hidden deep in the Everglades. Before I could process what I was seeing, a shout rang out. I'd been spotted. Panic surged through me as I saw 2 men emerge from one of the tents, yelling in rapid Spanish. One of them was holding a machete, the other what looked like an assault rifle. Fight or flight instinct took over, and I frantically started paddling backwards, nearly capsizing my canoe in my haste. More angry shouting. Then a gunshot cracked through the air, splintering a tree trunk inches from my head. I ducked down and paddled harder than I'd ever paddled in my life, my arms burning with the effort. I could hear the sounds of pursuit behind me, engines revving, more shouting. Heart pounding, I steered my canoe into the narrowest, most overgrown channels I could find, hoping to lose them in the maze-like waterways. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the foliage. Another gunshot, farther away this time. I didn't dare look back. After what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, I couldn't hear signs of pursuit anymore. But I didn't slow down. I kept paddling, choosing random directions, doubling back, doing everything I could to throw off any trail. Finally, utterly exhausted, I pulled my canoe up onto a small, secluded mud bank and tried to catch my breath and think. I was hopelessly lost in the swamp, being hunted by armed drug dealers with no way to call for help. My satellite phone was back at my base camp, miles away. As the adrenaline faded, fear and despair started to set in. What the hell was I going to do? I couldn't just sit here and wait to be found. But I had no idea which direction would take me to safety, and wandering aimlessly through the swamp was a death sentence. I forced myself to take deep breaths and think rationally. Okay, first priority was to stay hidden and alive. Second was to find my way back to civilization. I had some basic survival gear in my day pack, a compass, water purification tablets, some energy bars. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I decided to wait until nightfall to move. In the meantime, I pulled my canoe into a thick stand of sawgrass and used mud to camouflage it and myself. As I crouched there, barely daring to breathe, I heard the drone of airboats in the distance. They were still searching. The wait was agonizing. Every snapping twig or flutter of wings made me flinch. Mosquitoes feasted on me, but I didn't dare move to swat them away. As the sun began to set, the swamp came alive with a cacophony of frog and insect calls. Still I waited, straining my ears for any human sounds. Finally, true darkness fell. The nearly full moon provided enough light to see by, which was both a blessing and a curse. It would help me navigate, but it would also make me more visible if the hunters were still out there. I retrieved my now muddy compass from my pack and orientated myself. North-northeast should eventually take me to the outskirts of Miami. It was my best shot. I set out on foot, leaving my canoe behind. The going was brutal. Every step was a struggle through knee-deep water, sucking mud, and thorny vegetation. I had to constantly watch for snakes and gators, but the fear of what was behind me drove me forward. After a few hours of exhausting slogging, I heard the distinctive rumble of airboat engines again. I immediately dropped down into the water, submerging myself up to my nose. The boats were getting closer. I could see their searchlights sweeping back and forth through the trees. I stayed perfectly still as the boats passed by no more than 50 yards away. I could hear snatches of angry conversation in Spanish and English. They were clearly frustrated at not having found me yet. As soon as they were out of earshot, I resumed my journey, heart hammering in my chest. The rest of the night passed in a blur of mud, sweat, and terror. I lost track of how many times I had to hide from searching boats or wade through chest-deep water to avoid dry land where I might leave tracks. By the time the sky started to lighten with pre-dawn glow, I was utterly spent, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. As the sun rose, I finally spotted something that made my heart leap. Power lines in the distance. Civilization. I wanted to run towards them, but forced myself to stay cautious. There was still a lot of swamp between me and those power lines. It took another 2 hours of careful navigation, but I finally reached the edge of the Everglades. I emerged from the swamp onto the outskirts of a small town, probably looking like some kind of mud monster. The few early morning dog walkers and joggers gave me a wide berth. I stumbled into the first gas station I saw and begged the startled attendant to call the police. Within minutes, squad cars arrived, followed shortly by FBI agents. I spent the next several hours recounting my harrowing tale, first to local law enforcement, then to the feds. They took my mud-caked clothes as evidence and gave me a jumpsuit to wear. They showed me maps, asking me to point out where I thought the drug lab was. But after all the twists and turns of my escape, I couldn't be certain. I gave them my best guess. A massive search operation was launched, with airboats, helicopters, and teams of agents combing the Everglades. But they found nothing. No drug lab, no evidence of my story at all. I could tell they were starting to doubt me, wondering if I'd hallucinated the whole thing. But I know what I saw. I know it was real. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, thinking I hear airboat engines in the distance. I've tried to put it behind me and focus on finishing my degree, but I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a swamp the same way again. So that's my story. I don't expect everyone to believe me. Hell, sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. But I know what happened out there in the Everglades, and I know how close I came to never making it out alive. I was on a solo expedition in Virginia, documenting Civil War battlefields for my research. As a historian specializing in this era, I visited countless sites over the years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered that day. It was a crisp autumn morning when I set out to explore a lesser-known battlefield deep in the Virginia woods. The air was cool and damp, filled with the earthy scent of decaying leaves. I'd been looking forward to this trip for months, excited to uncover new details about a skirmish that took place here in 1863. As I hiked through the dense forest, my backpack loaded with supplies and equipment, I felt a sense of reverence for the history that surrounded me. These woods had witnessed so much bloodshed and sacrifice. I always try to maintain a respectful demeanor at these sites, aware that I'm walking on hallowed ground. After about an hour of hiking, I reached a small clearing that my research indicated was the likely location of the battle's command post. I set down my pack and pulled out my camera, eager to document any remaining evidence: old trenches, bullet-scarred trees, anything that could offer insight into what transpired here over 150 years ago. As I circled the clearing, snapping photos and jotting notes, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. It was subtle at first, just a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. But as I paused to listen, I realized the woods had gone eerily silent. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, nothing. That's when I heard it. Voices, low and muffled, coming from somewhere nearby. My first thought was that other historians or metal detectorists might be in the area. But something about the tone and cadence felt off. These didn't sound like the excited chatter of fellow researchers. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly made my way towards the source of the voices. As I crept through the underbrush, I caught glimpses of movement through the trees. There was a group of men gathered in a small ravine about 50 yards away. My heart began to race as I took in the scene before me. There were at least 8 men, all dressed in dark clothing. They appeared to be digging, but this was no ordinary archaeological excavation. Their movements were hurried and furtive, constantly glancing around as if worried about being discovered. I pulled out my phone, hoping to discreetly capture some video of their activities, but as I raised the device, a twig snapped beneath my foot. The sound seemed to echo through the silent forest. Instantly, all activity in the ravine ceased. 8 pairs of eyes snapped in my direction. For a moment, we all froze, me crouched behind a tree, them standing motionless with shovels in hand. Then chaos erupted. "Get him!" one of the men shouted, and suddenly they were all charging towards me. Panic surged through my body. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth or direction. All I knew was that I had to get away from those men. My lungs burned as I sprinted through the forest, leaping over fallen logs and ducking under low-hanging branches. I could hear them behind me, their shouts and the sound of snapping twigs growing closer by the second. In desperation, I veered off the faint trail I'd been following and plunged deeper into the woods. The terrain became rougher, the vegetation denser. Thorny vines tore at my clothes and skin, but I didn't dare slow down. As I scrambled up a steep, rocky slope, I risked a glance over my shoulder. To my horror, I saw two of the men less than 30 yards behind me. Their faces were contorted with rage, eyes locked onto me like predators chasing down prey. Reaching the top of the slope, I found myself in another small clearing. My eyes darted around frantically, searching for somewhere to hide. That's when I spotted it. A massive fallen oak tree, its trunk easily 5 feet in diameter. Without hesitation, I sprinted for the log. As I reached it, I saw that erosion had carved out a hollow space beneath the trunk, partially hidden by ferns and moss. It was my only chance. I dove into the hollow, scraping my arms and knees in the process. Pressed against the damp earth, I tried to control my ragged breathing as I heard my pursuers enter the clearing. "Where'd he go?" one of them growled. "He can't have gotten far," another replied. "Spread out and find him." I could hear them moving around the clearing, their heavy footsteps just feet away from my hiding spot. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was certain they would hear it. Sweat trickled down my face, and every muscle in my body was tensed, ready to bolt if discovered. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the men searched the area. At one point, a pair of boots stopped right next to the log. I held my breath, certain I was about to be dragged out, but after a moment, they moved on. Eventually, their voices began to fade as they moved deeper into the forest. Still, I didn't dare move. I remained in that hollow, scarcely breathing, for what must have been at least an hour. When I finally mustered the courage to peer out, the clearing was empty. The forest had returned to its normal state, birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze as if nothing had happened. On shaky legs, I emerged from my hiding place. My clothes were filthy and torn, my arms and face scratched and bleeding from my mad dash through the woods. But I was alive. I retrieved my backpack from where I'd dropped it earlier and quickly made my way back to my car, constantly looking over my shoulder. It wasn't until I was miles away, driving down the highway, that I finally began to process what had happened. Who were those men? What were they digging for in that ravine? And why had they reacted so violently to being discovered? My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. As soon as I had cell service, I called the local police and reported the incident. They took my statement, but seemed skeptical, suggesting the men might have been other researchers or metal detectorists who were simply startled by my presence. But I know what I saw, the furtiveness of their actions, the military precision of their pursuit. These were no amateur history buffs. Something sinister was happening in those woods, and I had stumbled upon it. In the weeks since, I've pored over maps and historical records, trying to understand what might have drawn that group to that specific location. Was there something valuable buried there? Some dark secret from the war that was never meant to be uncovered? I've considered returning to the site, this time better prepared and with backup. But every time I think about those men's faces, the cold determination in their eyes as they chased me, I find myself hesitating. Whatever is going on in those Virginia woods, it's clear that some people will go to great lengths to keep it hidden. And as much as the historian in me yearns to uncover the truth, I can't shake the feeling that digging any deeper could have dire consequences. For now, I've focused on documenting everything I can remember about that day. The location, the men's appearances, every detail of their strange excavation. I've secured this information in multiple locations, ensuring that if anything happens to me, the truth won't be buried along with whatever those men were seeking. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what I stumbled upon that day in the Virginia woods. But one thing is certain, it has forever changed the way I view my work and the history I study. Sometimes the past doesn't want to be uncovered, and those who try may find themselves in grave danger. As I sit here writing this, I can't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see those men watching me from the shadows. The rational part of my mind says I'm safe, that they couldn't possibly have tracked me down. But after what I experienced, I'm not sure I'll ever feel truly safe again. To anyone reading this who might be planning their own historical expeditions, especially to remote locations, be careful. Be aware of your surroundings. And if something doesn't feel right, trust your instincts and get out of there. You never know what secrets might be lurking in the shadows of history, or who might be willing to kill to keep those secrets buried. I was always the adventurous type, seeking thrills in nature's untamed wilderness. That's what led me to plan a solo hiking expedition in the Canadian Rockies last summer. Little did I know that my quest for solitude and natural beauty would turn into a terrifying fight for survival. The morning I set out was crisp and clear, perfect hiking weather. I shouldered my heavy backpack, double-checked my supplies and GPS, and hit the trail with a spring in my step. The scenery was breathtaking, towering peaks, pristine alpine meadows, crystalline streams. I felt truly alive and at peace. As I trekked deeper into the backcountry, the terrain became more rugged. By late afternoon, I had climbed to a remote rocky ridge overlooking a densely forested valley. That's when I heard it, the sharp crack of a gunshot echoing through the mountains. My first thought was that it must be another hiker or a park ranger, but something felt off. Hunting wasn't allowed in this area, and it wasn't the right season anyway. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. Quietly, I made my way down the ridge and into the valley, following the direction of the gunshot. As I got closer, I heard men's voices and the rumble of ATV engines. Crouching behind a fallen tree, I peered through the underbrush, and my blood ran cold. About 50 yards away, I saw a group of men loading the carcass of a grizzly bear onto the back of an ATV. They were laughing and congratulating each other on the kill. This was clearly an illegal poaching operation. My mind raced. I knew I had to document this somehow and report it to the authorities. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and started recording video, but in my nervousness, I accidentally hit the button for flash photography. A bright light flashed from my hiding spot. The men instantly went silent and turned in my direction. "What the hell was that?" one of them growled. Panic seized me. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as fast as I could. Behind me, I heard angry shouts and the roar of ATV engines starting up. "Get him! Don't let him get away!" Pure adrenaline coursed through my veins as I sprinted through the forest. I could hear the ATVs in pursuit, getting closer by the second. My only advantage was my ability to navigate the dense woods where their vehicles couldn't go. I zigzagged between trees, leapt over logs, and splashed through a shallow creek, trying to throw them off my trail. But they were relentless. Whenever I thought I'd lost them, I'd hear engines revving nearby. As I ran, my mind flashed to all the stories I'd read about hikers disappearing in national parks, never to be seen again. Was I about to become one of those statistics? The thought spurred me to run even faster. After what felt like hours of frantic fleeing, my lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly. I knew I couldn't keep running much longer. I needed to find a place to hide. Up ahead, I spotted a jumble of massive boulders, the remnants of an ancient rock slide. It was my only chance. I mustered the last of my energy and scrambled up the boulders, wedging myself into a small cave-like opening between two huge rocks. I lay there, gasping for air, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The drone of ATV engines grew closer. Through a tiny gap, I saw two of the men dismount and begin searching the area on foot. "He's got to be around here somewhere," one of them said, scanning the boulders. "Spread out and find him." I held my breath as they passed within feet of my hiding spot. One of them paused right in front of the opening, so close I could have reached out and touched his boot. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain I was about to be discovered. But after a tense moment, he moved on. I heard their voices growing fainter as they continued their search further up the slope. I stayed frozen in that cramped space for what felt like an eternity, terrified to make even the slightest sound. As the sky began to darken, I finally heard the ATVs fire up and drive away. Even then, I was too scared to move. I spent a miserable night huddled in that rocky crevice, jumping at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. I was sure they were still out there, waiting to ambush me. As the first gray light of dawn seeped through the trees, I finally dared to emerge from my hiding place. My whole body ached. I was parched with thirst, and my clothes were torn and filthy. But I was alive. I knew I had to get to safety and report what I'd seen. Checking my GPS, I saw there was a ranger station about 10 miles away. It would be a grueling hike in my exhausted state, but I had no choice. I set off at a grueling pace, constantly looking over my shoulder and diving for cover at any unusual sound. The beautiful mountain scenery that had so enchanted me yesterday now felt ominous and threatening. After several torturous hours of hiking, I finally spotted the ranger station through the trees. Limping the final few hundred yards, I practically fell through the door. The startled ranger on duty rushed to help me. "What happened to you?" he asked, taking in my battered appearance. Through parched lips, I managed to croak out, "Poachers, grizzly bear, chased me," before collapsing into a chair. The next few hours passed in a blur as I gulped down water, wolfed down some food, and gave my statement to the rangers and police. They were gravely concerned by my report and immediately mobilized a team to investigate the area where I'd seen the poachers. As I sat there, slowly coming down from the adrenaline high, the reality of what I'd been through began to sink in. I'd always sought adventure in the wilderness, but I'd never truly grasped how dangerous it could be. Not just from wildlife or the elements, but from the darkness that humans can bring even to the most beautiful places. The rangers offered to arrange transport back to town for me, but I decided to stay until the investigation was complete. I felt a responsibility to see it through, to make sure those poachers were brought to justice. Over the next few days, evidence was indeed found corroborating my story. ATV tracks, shell casings, and even traces of blood from the poached grizzly. The authorities expanded their search, setting up roadblocks and surveilling the area. A week later, they made arrests. It turned out to be a sophisticated poaching ring that had been operating in the area for years, killing endangered wildlife and selling animal parts on the black market. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that my terrifying ordeal had led to shutting down this illegal operation. But I also knew I'd be haunted by those harrowing hours of being hunted through the wilderness. As I finally headed home, I gazed out at the majestic Rockies one last time. Their beauty was unchanged, but my perception of them had been altered forever. I knew I'd return to the mountains again someday. The call of adventure was too strong to resist. But I'd carry with me a new respect for the wild and a keen awareness of both the wonder and danger it holds. That fateful hike taught me that sometimes the greatest threats we face don't come from nature, but from our fellow humans. And yet, it also showed me the strength and resilience I had within myself, a strength I never knew I possessed until I was pushed to the very edge of survival. Now, months later, I still have nightmares about being chased through those woods. The crack of a twig or the rumble of an engine can send my heart racing. But I also feel a deep sense of purpose. My experience opened my eyes to the ongoing threat of poaching, and I've become an advocate for wildlife conservation. I share my story not to discourage others from experiencing the majesty of places like the Canadian Rockies, but as a reminder to always be prepared, stay alert, and respect the power of the wilderness. And perhaps most importantly, to stand up for what's right, even in the face of danger. Because sometimes, one person really can make a difference. It started out as a typical evening. The parents left for their date night around 7 p.m., and I got the kids fed and settled in to watch a movie. Everything was calm and routine, until the phone rang. I answered it, expecting it to be the Thompsons checking in. Instead, there was just heavy breathing on the other end. I said hello a few times, but no response. Figuring it was just a prank call, I hung up. A few minutes later, it rang again. This time, a man's voice asked, "Are the children sleeping yet?" My heart started racing. How did this person know there were kids here? I demanded to know who was calling, but he just chuckled and hung up. I tried to brush it off, but I was starting to feel uneasy. I double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked. The phone rang again. "What are you wearing?" the voice whispered. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. The calls kept coming, getting more and more disturbing. He asked about specific toys the kids had, described furniture in the house, even mentioned what I'd cooked for dinner. It was like he could see inside. I was terrified but trying to stay calm for the kids' sake. They seemed oblivious, absorbed in their movie. During one call, I heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs. My blood ran cold. "I told you I can see you," the voice taunted. I wanted to grab the kids and run, but I was paralyzed with fear. What if he was waiting outside? I called the police, keeping my voice low. They said they'd send someone to check it out. Those next 15 minutes of waiting were excruciating. Every creak of the house made me jump. I huddled on the couch with Lily and Max, telling them we were playing a quiet game. Suddenly, all the lights in the house went out. In the pitch blackness, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. Lily started to cry. I clamped my hand over her mouth, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The footsteps got closer. I could hear ragged breathing. He was in the room with us. I was frozen, desperately willing the police to arrive. A hand brushed my shoulder, and I let out a blood-curdling scream. Lights flooded the room. It was the police. They'd gotten the power back on and come in through the back door. They searched the entire house but found no intruder. The phone line had been cut outside. They took my statement, but without any real evidence, there wasn't much they could do. When the Thompsons got home, I was a hysterical mess. I tried to explain what happened, but it all sounded so unbelievable. They were sympathetic, but I could tell they thought I'd overreacted to some prank calls. I quit babysitting after that night. For weeks I couldn't sleep without the lights on. I kept feeling like I was being watched. Even now, years later, I get paranoid when I'm alone in a house at night. I've never been able to shake the feeling that he's still out there somewhere, watching and waiting. The police never found any leads. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, but then I remember the terror I felt, the absolute certainty that someone was in that house with us. It was real, and the thought that he's never been caught still haunts me to this day. I don't know why he targeted that house, or me, that night. Was it random? Had he been watching the family? I'll probably never know. All I know is that my life changed forever. I can't even hear a phone ring without getting anxious. I've tried therapy, but it's hard to process something so inexplicable. How do you move on when you don't have any answers? When you know there's evil out there that can intrude on even the most normal, safe-seeming situations? I still babysit my nieces sometimes, but only at my own house where I feel secure. I've installed every security device imaginable. Sometimes I feel silly being so paranoid, but then I remember that night, how close we came to God knows what, and I know I can never be too careful. I wonder about Lily and Max sometimes. They were so young, I don't think they fully understood what was happening. I hope they weren't traumatized. I hope they can still feel safe in their own home. As for me, I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again. That night shattered my sense of security in a way I'm not sure can ever be fully repaired. I'm jumpy, always looking over my shoulder. Loud noises make me panic. I hate being alone in the dark. I've tried to move on with my life. I graduated college, got a job, tried to date, but it's always there in the back of my mind. The knowledge that evil is real, that it can invade your life without warning or reason. Sometimes I think I see him, a glimpse of a face in a crowd, a silhouette in a window. Is it just my imagination? Or is he still out there, still watching? I may never know. And that uncertainty is almost worse than knowing for sure. I've thought about moving far away, starting over somewhere new. But would that really help? Or would I just be running from shadows? I try to remind myself that I survived, that whatever his intentions were that night, he didn't succeed. The kids were safe. I was safe. But it's hard to feel like a survivor when I still feel so afraid. I know logically that the chances of something like that happening again are slim. But logic doesn't always win against trauma. Every time I'm in a quiet house at night, every time a phone rings unexpectedly, I'm right back in that moment of terror. I've connected online with other people who've had similar experiences. It helps to know I'm not alone, that I'm not crazy. But it's also terrifying to realize how many predators are out there, how many lives have been changed by encounters like mine. I still have nightmares sometimes. I'm back in that dark room, hearing those footsteps, feeling that hand on my shoulder. I wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, unable to shake the fear for hours. I've tried to find meaning in what happened. Maybe it's made me more cautious, more aware. Maybe I can use my experience to help others stay safe. But mostly, I just wish I could forget. Wish I could go back to being that carefree college student who thought the worst thing that could happen while babysitting was the kids refusing to go to bed. I don't have any profound conclusions or life lessons to share. Just a warning, I guess. Be careful. Be aware. Trust your instincts. And never take your safety for granted. Because in an instant, everything can change. And some scars never fully heal. The farm was beautiful but isolated, surrounded by fields and woods as far as the eye could see. As darkness fell, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. The kids were asleep upstairs, and I was alone in the living room watching TV when I heard a car pulling up the long driveway. My heart started racing. The Johnsons weren't due back for hours. I peeked out the window and saw an old beat-up truck I didn't recognize. A tall man in dirty clothes got out, stumbling slightly as he walked towards the house. Something about his uneven gait and the way he was muttering to himself set off alarm bells. I quickly locked the front door and turned off the lights, hoping he'd think no one was home. But then came a loud, insistent knocking. "Hello? Anyone home? I know you're in there." The man's voice was slurred and aggressive. I stayed silent, frozen in fear. After a moment, he started pounding on the door. "Open up! I'm family! I need to get something from inside." Family. I'd met the Johnsons' relatives. This guy definitely wasn't one of them. My hands shook as I dialed 911 on my cell phone, whispering frantically to the operator. She assured me police were on their way, but it would take at least 20 minutes given our remote location. The banging on the door got louder. "Let me in, damn it. I know it's in there." I ran upstairs to check on the kids. Emma, only 4, was crying softly in her bed. "What's happening?" she whimpered. I tried to keep my voice calm as I gathered her and 6-year-old Tommy into the master bedroom. "We're going to play a quiet game," I said, forcing a smile. "We need to be very still and quiet, okay?" They nodded, eyes wide with fear. I locked the bedroom door and pushed a heavy dresser in front of it. The sound of shattering glass from downstairs made us all jump. Oh God, he was breaking in. I held the kids close, trying to steady my breathing as I heard heavy footsteps and angry muttering. "Where is it?" "I know you took it from me," the man bellowed, his voice echoing through the house. "Took what? What was he looking for?" I heard him rummaging through drawers and cabinets, growing more agitated by the second. "Come out! I know you're hiding." Emma started to cry again, and I clasped my hand gently over her mouth, praying the intruder wouldn't hear. Tommy was shaking uncontrollably. The footsteps got closer, coming up the stairs. My heart felt like it would explode out of my chest. He tried the bedroom door handle, rattling it violently when he found it locked. "Open this door," he roared, kicking it hard enough to make the wood splinter. The dresser shifted slightly with each impact. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything to defend us. There was a heavy metal lamp on the nightstand. It would have to do. I gripped it tightly, positioning myself between the door and the terrified children. Just as I thought the door was about to give way, I heard sirens in the distance. The intruder cursed loudly. "This isn't over," he yelled. "I'll be back for what's mine." The sound of his retreating footsteps was the biggest relief I've ever felt. I heard his truck start up and peel out down the driveway just as the police cars pulled up. When the officers found us huddled in the bedroom, I broke down sobbing. They searched the property, but the man was long gone. The house was a mess, drawers emptied, furniture overturned. But thankfully, nothing seemed to be stolen. The Johnsons rushed home, pale and shaken. They swore they had no idea who the intruder could be or what he thought they had taken from him. The police took our statements and dusted for prints, but warned us it was unlikely they'd catch the guy. I spent that night at the Johnsons', too scared to drive home alone. For weeks after, I jumped at every sound and couldn't sleep without the lights on. I kept replaying those terrifying moments in my mind, imagining what could have happened if the police hadn't shown up when they did. The incident left me with a deep fear of isolated places. I gave up babysitting altogether and moved to the city where I felt safer surrounded by people. But even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that night on the farm. The sound of the intruder's voice, the splintering wood of the door, the sheer terror of thinking we were about to be hurt or worse. It's all seared into my memory. I'll never understand what that man was looking for or why he targeted that house. Was he just a drug-addled stranger who stumbled upon the wrong place? Or did he have some connection to the Johnsons they weren't telling me about? I'll probably never know. All I know is that I'm forever grateful we made it out unharmed. But the fear and trauma of that night have stayed with me. It taught me that danger can find you anywhere, even in places that seem safe and idyllic. Now I'm always on guard, always aware of my surroundings, because you never know when a peaceful evening can turn into a nightmare. I often wonder about Emma and Tommy, hoping the incident didn't scar them too deeply. I hope they were young enough that the memories have faded. But for me, that night on the farm will haunt me forever. It was a harsh reminder of how quickly our sense of security can be shattered and how vulnerable we really are. In the years since, I've tried to move on and not let fear control my life. But I'll never forget the lesson I learned that night, that safety is an illusion and danger can come knocking when you least expect it. All we can do is be prepared, stay vigilant, and hope that if the worst happens, help will arrive in time. Sometimes I drive past that old farmhouse, always in broad daylight with friends in the car. It looks peaceful and ordinary, betraying no hint of the terror we experienced there. But I know the truth, that any place, no matter how idyllic, can hide dark secrets and attract inexplicable danger. That night changed me forever. It opened my eyes to a frightening reality I had been blissfully unaware of before. Now I live with a constant undercurrent of anxiety, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Is that strange man still out there somewhere? Will he make good on his threat to return? These questions haunt me, even as I try to build a normal life. I'm sharing this story as a warning to others. Trust your instincts. Be aware of your surroundings. Have an escape plan. You never know when you might need it, because sometimes the monsters are real and they come knocking in the night when you're all alone in the dark. I was working as a nanny for a wealthy family in their high-rise apartment downtown. The pay was great and the kids were sweet, but something always felt a little off about that building. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. It started with small things. I'd come back from taking the kids to the park and find objects slightly out of place in the apartment. A chair moved a few inches, a book on a different shelf. I figured I was just being forgetful, or the kids had been playing. Then I started noticing Joe, one of the maintenance guys, hanging around a lot more. He'd be in the hallway when I arrived in the morning, or I'd run into him by the elevators multiple times a day. He was always polite, but there was an intensity to the way he looked at me that made me uneasy. About a month into the job, I started hearing odd noises coming from the vents, scratching sounds, like something was crawling through them. I mentioned it to the family, but they brushed it off as the building settling or maybe mice. Things escalated quickly after that. I came in one morning to find drawers left open that I knew I'd closed the night before. A few days later, I noticed some of my personal items had been moved around in my bag. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Was I just being paranoid? But then I found long, dark hairs in the bathroom sink that didn't belong to anyone in the family. That's when I knew someone had definitely been in the apartment. I was terrified but didn't want to seem hysterical, so I casually asked the doorman if there had been any maintenance work done recently. He said no, but mentioned that Joe had been working a lot of overtime lately, often at night. My blood ran cold. I started covering the vents with duct tape before I left each day, but when I'd return, I'd find the tape disturbed or removed entirely. I finally worked up the courage to report my concerns to building management. They seemed skeptical, but said they'd look into it. Meanwhile, the noises in the vents got louder and more frequent. I'd hear shuffling above me as I tried to sleep at night. It all came to a head one evening when the parents were out. I'd just put the kids to bed when I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway outside. My heart was pounding as I looked through the peephole, but saw no one there. Then I heard a noise from inside one of the bedrooms. Panic overtook me, and I grabbed the kids, ran out of the apartment, and called 911 from the hallway. The police arrived quickly and searched the place. To my horror, they found Joe hiding in a maintenance closet connected to the vents. He'd created an elaborate system of peepholes and crawl spaces to spy on residents throughout the building. They discovered cameras and stolen items from multiple apartments. I was in shock. All those months of feeling watched, of doubting my own sanity, it had all been real. Joe was arrested, and it came out that he'd been stalking several women in the building, but I had been his main fixation. The whole ordeal left me deeply traumatized. I couldn't stay in that apartment or even that city anymore. I moved away and started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and paranoia that lingered. It's been years, but I still get chills thinking about those scratching sounds in the vents. I triple-check the locks on my doors and windows every night. Part of me is always looking over my shoulder, wondering if I'm really alone or if someone is watching from the shadows. I know Joe is in prison now, but I can't shake the feeling of vulnerability. How many other buildings have hidden passages or weak security? How many other seemingly normal maintenance workers or neighbors are secretly predators? I try to tell myself that what happened to me was a freak occurrence. But late at night, when the house creaks and groans, I find myself holding my breath and straining to listen. Is it just the wind? Or is someone crawling through the walls, waiting for the right moment to emerge? The rational part of my brain knows I'm safe now, but there's a primal fear that was awakened in me during those months of being watched and stalked. A deep-seated wariness that I don't think will ever fully go away. I'm sharing my story as a warning to others, especially young women living alone. Trust your instincts if something feels off. Don't ignore red flags or brush aside your concerns. It's better to seem paranoid than to ignore real danger. Be aware of your surroundings and who has access to your living space. Check credentials of maintenance workers. Consider adding extra security measures like cameras. Most importantly, if you feel unsafe, speak up. Report your concerns, even if you're not 100% sure. You're not crazy for protecting yourself. I only wish I had taken action sooner before things escalated so far. I'm still working on feeling secure again. Some days are better than others, but I know I'm one of the lucky ones. My story could have had a much darker ending if Joe hadn't been caught when he was. So please, stay vigilant and stay safe out there. You never know who might be watching from behind the walls. That fateful day started like any other. I arrived at 8 a.m. to look after 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Liam while their parents were at work. The kids were playing in the backyard, so I decided to do some light cleaning upstairs. As I was dusting in one of the spare bedrooms, I noticed the pull cord for the attic access was swinging slightly. Curious, I gave it a tug and climbed up to investigate. The attic was dimly lit and filled with the usual clutter. Old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations, that sort of thing. But something caught my eye in the far corner. An ornate wooden trunk that looked much older than anything else up there. My curiosity got the better of me, and I went to take a closer look. The trunk wasn't locked, which surprised me. I hesitated for a moment, knowing I probably shouldn't be snooping, but my curiosity won out. I carefully lifted the heavy lid and peered inside. At first glance, it just looked like a bunch of old papers and notebooks, but as I started leafing through them, my blood ran cold. These weren't just any old documents. This was a handwritten diary belonging to Mr. Johnson, and the contents were utterly horrifying. Page after page detailed gruesome crimes spanning back decades, murders, assaults, missing persons. The diary entries were meticulous, describing locations, dates, methods used. My hands were shaking as I read, unable to believe what I was seeing. How could the friendly, upstanding Mr. Johnson I knew be responsible for such monstrous acts? I was so engrossed in the diary that I lost all track of time. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Panic shot through me as I realized Mr. Johnson was home early. I scrambled to put everything back exactly as I'd found it, my heart pounding. As I heard the front door open downstairs, I eased the attic hatch closed as quietly as possible and tried to calm my ragged breathing. I rushed into the kids' room and pretended to be tidying up, fighting to keep my hands from trembling. "Hello? Anyone home?" Mr. Johnson called out. "Up here," I managed to reply, proud that my voice didn't crack. "Just cleaning up a bit while the kids play outside." I heard his footsteps on the stairs and fought to keep my expression neutral as he appeared in the doorway. Could he tell something was off? Did he suspect I'd been in the attic? "Everything all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed slightly. "You look a bit pale." I forced a smile. "Oh, I'm fine. Just been running around after the kids all morning. You know how they can be." He nodded, seeming to accept my explanation. "Well, I just popped home to grab some files I forgot. I'll be heading back to the office shortly if you're okay here." "Of course," I said brightly. "We're all good. Have a nice day." As soon as I heard his car pull away, I sank to the floor, my legs unable to support me any longer. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd discovered. Part of me wanted to grab the kids and run far away, but I knew I needed to be smart about this. I somehow made it through the rest of the day, going through the motions of caring for Emma and Liam while my thoughts raced. As soon as Mrs. Johnson got home, I made my excuses and left, driving straight to my parents' house. I burst through the door in tears, finally letting out all the emotion I'd been holding back. My parents were alarmed, asking what was wrong. Through sobs, I told them everything I'd found. To their credit, they believed me immediately. My dad called his friend on the police force while my mom held me, trying to calm me down. Within an hour, detectives were at our house taking my statement. I told them exactly where to find the trunk and its awful contents. The next few days were a blur. The police searched the Johnson house and arrested Mr. Johnson based on the evidence in the diary. It turned out he'd been responsible for multiple unsolved murders and disappearances over the years. The community was in shock. No one could believe that such a respected member of society could be hiding such darkness. As the full extent of his crimes came to light, I struggled to reconcile the monster in the diary with the man I thought I knew. How many times had I been alone in that house, never suspecting the evil that lurked there? The thought made me sick to my stomach. In the weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at shadows, unable to shake the feeling of violation. I kept replaying that day in my mind, wondering what might have happened if Mr. Johnson had realized what I'd found. The nightmares were relentless. Visions of him discovering me in the attic, of becoming another victim detailed in those awful pages. I've since started seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma of what I uncovered. It's been a long process, but I'm slowly starting to feel safe again. Still, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a seemingly normal house or family the same way. I now know all too well that the most sinister secrets can hide behind the most ordinary facades. This experience has changed me profoundly. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the potential for darkness in the world, but I also feel a sense of purpose. By stumbling upon that diary, I helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice and closure to countless families of victims. It's a heavy burden to bear, but I'm grateful that I was able to unveil the truth. I still babysit occasionally, but never again in old houses with attics. Some things are better left undiscovered, but I'll never forget that day in the Johnsons' Victorian, when a simple, curious impulse led me to uncover a decades-long reign of terror. It just goes to show that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't hiding under the bed. They're living right next door, hiding in plain sight. It was a typical Friday evening. Mr. and Mrs. Miller were out for their weekly date night, and I was watching their 6-year-old son, Jacob. We'd had dinner, played some board games, and I'd just put Jacob to bed around 8:30. I settled in on the couch to watch some TV and scroll through my phone. Around 10 p.m., I started hearing some strange noises. At first, I tried to brush it off. Old houses make weird sounds, right? But it kept happening, scraping and thumping sounds that seemed to be coming from the roof. My heart started racing as I muted the TV and listened intently. There was definitely something moving up there. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or something. But then I heard a much louder thud, like something heavy had landed on the back porch. Panic gripped me as I realized this was no animal. Someone was trying to get into the house. I raced upstairs to check on Jacob, my mind reeling. Should I call the police? Try to get out of the house? What if they had already gotten inside? I made it to Jacob's room and was relieved to see him still sleeping peacefully. I quietly closed his door and tried to steady my breathing as I considered what to do. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to pry open the back window downstairs. Oh God, they were actually breaking in. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone to call 911. But then I hesitated. What if they heard me talking? What if they got in before the police arrived? In that moment of indecision, survival instinct took over. I knew I had to protect Jacob at all costs. I crept back downstairs as quietly as I could, my eyes darting around for anything I could use as a weapon. I spotted a heavy floor lamp in the corner of the living room and unplugged it, gripping the base tightly. I could hear the intruder still struggling with the window. Forcing myself to breathe, I crept towards the back of the house. As I rounded the corner into the kitchen, I saw a dark figure silhouetted in the window. They had managed to get it partially open and were trying to squeeze through. Terror and adrenaline surged through me. Without thinking, I rushed forward and swung the lamp as hard as I could. There was a sickening crack as it connected with the intruder's head. They let out a startled yell and tumbled backwards out the window. I slammed it shut and locked it, then ran to check the other doors and windows. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the locks. Once I was sure the house was secure, I finally called 911. I was almost hysterical as I tried to explain what had happened to the dispatcher. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, but they couldn't find any sign of the intruder. They took my statement and searched the property, but whoever it was had vanished into the night. One officer gently suggested that maybe I had imagined it or overreacted to a noise, but I knew what I had seen and heard. The back window was partially open, there were scuff marks on the sill, and they found a single muddy footprint on the porch. Mr. and Mrs. Miller came home to find police cars in their driveway. They were horrified by what had happened and incredibly grateful that I had protected Jacob. But I felt sick to my stomach. What if I hadn't heard the noises in time? What if the intruder had gotten in before I could stop them? The what-ifs tormented me. In the days and weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of violation and fear. I jumped at every little sound. I couldn't sleep without checking and rechecking that all the doors and windows were locked. I kept reliving those terrifying moments over and over. The Millers asked me to keep babysitting, but I just couldn't do it. The thought of being alone in that house at night paralyzed me with fear. I ended up quitting my babysitting jobs altogether. I couldn't handle being responsible for kids' safety when I felt so vulnerable myself. It's been 5 years, and I still struggle with the trauma of that night. I'm hyper-vigilant about home security. I installed an alarm system and security cameras in my apartment. I never stay home alone at night if I can help it. Sometimes I wonder about the person who tried to break in. Were they just looking to rob the place? Or did they have more sinister intentions? I'll never know for sure, and that uncertainty haunts me. I've been in therapy, trying to work through the anxiety and PTSD. It's gotten better over time, but I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe and carefree again. That night stole something from me that I can't get back. I often think about how differently things could have gone. If I hadn't heard the noises, if I had frozen in fear instead of acting, if the intruder had gotten into the house. I'm grateful that I was able to protect Jacob, but the cost to my own sense of security and peace of mind has been immense. I know now that the world can be a dangerous place, and that safety is never guaranteed. I'm more cautious and guarded in every aspect of my life. I appreciate the good moments more, but I'm always braced for something bad to happen. Sometimes I drive by the Millers' old house. They moved shortly after the incident. I look at that back window and shudder, remembering the shadowy figure trying to break in. Part of me still expects to see someone lurking there, waiting to strike again. I've never felt comfortable babysitting or being alone in an isolated house since that night. The vulnerability is too much to bear. I stick to busy, well-lit areas now. I need to be around other people to feel safe. When I see news stories about home invasions or attacks, it brings it all rushing back. I relive the fear and panic, the sound of footsteps on the roof, the thud of the lamp connecting with the intruder's head. It's like my body and mind are stuck in that moment, unable to fully move on. I often wonder if I did the right thing by confronting the intruder. Should I have hidden with Jacob and waited for the police? But then I think about what could have happened if I hadn't acted, and I know I made the only choice I could. The experience has made me much more aware of my surroundings. I'm always scanning for potential threats or escape routes. It's exhausting to live with that level of constant vigilance, but I can't seem to turn it off. I've tried to channel some of my anxiety into positive action. I've taken self-defense classes and learned about home security. I volunteer with a victim support group, trying to help others who have been through similar traumas. It helps a little to feel like I'm doing something proactive. But there are still nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, certain that I hear someone trying to break in. The fear never fully goes away. It's become a part of me, shaping how I move through the world. I know that statistically, the chances of something like that happening again are slim. But statistics don't calm the primal fear that was awakened that night. Once you've come face to face with true danger in what should have been a safe space, it changes you forever. I'm still working on finding a balance between being cautious and not letting fear control my life. It's a daily struggle, but I'm determined to keep pushing forward, to not let that one terrifying night define my entire existence. I may never be the carefree person I was before, but I'm learning to find moments of peace and joy despite the lingering anxiety, and I'll never take my safety or security for granted again. That night taught me how quickly everything can change, and how important it is to trust your instincts and be prepared for anything. This particular Friday started like any other. I arrived at 6 p.m., got the usual rundown from Mrs. Buckingham about Tommy's homework and bedtime, and settled in for a quiet evening of pizza and movies with the kid. Tommy was sprawled out on the living room floor with his tablet, which wasn't unusual. He often played games or watched videos while I caught up on some reading. Around 8 p.m., I noticed Tommy seemed extra focused on whatever he was doing on the tablet. His brow was furrowed in concentration as his thumbs moved rapidly across the screen. Curious, I asked, "What you playing there, bud?" Tommy barely glanced up. "Just talking to my friend Mike." A small alarm bell went off in my head. I didn't know of any Mikes in Tommy's life, not in his class at school or on any of his sports teams. "Oh yeah? Who's Mike?" I tried to keep my tone casual. "He's my online friend. We play Minecraft together sometimes." My unease grew. The Buckinghams were pretty strict about Tommy's online activities. I was pretty sure they monitored his accounts and only let him play with kids they knew in real life. "That's cool," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "How long have you known Mike?" Tommy shrugged, still absorbed in the screen. "A few weeks, I guess. He's really nice. He said he might come visit me soon." My blood ran cold. Every warning I'd ever heard about online predators came rushing back. I knew I needed to see what was on that tablet. "Hey, Tommy, it's getting close to bedtime. Why don't you go brush your teeth and get your PJs on? I'll put on a show for us to watch before bed." Tommy groaned, but didn't argue. As soon as he was out of the room, I snatched up the tablet. My hands were shaking as I navigated to his recent messages. What I saw made my stomach lurch. There was indeed a conversation with someone named Mike, but it wasn't the innocent chat of two kids playing Minecraft. The messages from Mike were clearly from an adult, filled with inappropriate compliments and thinly veiled sexual innuendos. Worse, he was asking Tommy for his address, saying he wanted to come surprise him soon. I felt like I was going to be sick. How long had this been going on? How close had this creep gotten to actually showing up at the house? I knew I needed to act fast. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911. I tried to keep my voice low as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me officers were on the way and advised me to lock all doors and windows. I hung up and immediately started securing the house, my heart pounding. I checked that the front and back doors were locked, then moved through the rooms, making sure every window was latched. As I finished in the kitchen, I nearly jumped out of my skin at a sharp knock on the front door. Panic gripped me. It couldn't be the police already, could it? I crept to the front window and peeked out. My blood turned to ice. There was a man on the porch, youngish, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and a hoodie pulled low over his face. He knocked again, more insistently this time. "Tommy," he called out. "Tommy, are you there? It's me, Mike. I came to surprise you, buddy." Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. He was here. The creep from the internet was actually here, on the porch, trying to get to Tommy. I backed away from the window, trying not to hyperventilate. "Tommy," Mike called again, his voice taking on an edge. "I know you're home, kiddo. Come on, open up. Don't you want to see your friend?" I heard Tommy's footsteps on the stairs, and my heart nearly stopped. "Who's that?" he asked innocently. I grabbed him and pulled him away from the door. "Nobody," I said, trying to keep the terror out of my voice. "Just go back upstairs and stay in your room, okay? Don't come down no matter what." Tommy looked confused but didn't argue. As soon as he was safely upstairs, I grabbed my phone again, hands shaking so bad I could barely dial. The 911 dispatcher answered, and I frantically explained that the man from the internet was here, right now, trying to get in. The knocking had turned to pounding now. "I know you're in there," Mike shouted, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Open this fucking door." I was shaking uncontrollably, torn between wanting to grab Tommy and run out the back door and being afraid to move at all. Where were the police? How long had it been? It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The pounding stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was eerie silence. Then I heard a scraping sound from the back of the house. Oh God, was he trying to break in through a window? Just as I was about to completely lose it, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, police sirens growing louder by the second. I sagged against the wall in relief, tears streaming down my face. The next hour was a blur. Police swarmed the property. They caught Mike trying to pry open a back window and took him into custody. I answered what felt like a million questions, my voice shaky and my hands still trembling. When Mr. and Mrs. Buckingham got home, they were absolutely horrified. Mrs. Buckingham hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe, sobbing and thanking me over and over. Mr. Buckingham looked like he was in shock. The police explained that Mike was actually Michael Delgado, a registered sex offender with a history of targeting children online. He'd been released from prison just months ago and was already back to his old tricks. If I hadn't discovered the messages when I did, I couldn't even bear to think about what might have happened. In the days that followed, I learned more details that made my skin crawl. Mike had been grooming Tommy for weeks, slowly gaining his trust and gathering information. He knew Tommy's routines, knew when his parents would be out. He had been planning this for a while. The Buckinghams were consumed with guilt. They thought they had been so careful with Tommy's online activity, but Mike had found a way around their safeguards. They showered me with thanks and rewards, but honestly, I was just grateful I had been there to stop something horrible from happening. Tommy was confused and upset at first. He didn't understand why his friend had been taken away by the police. But as the Buckinghams gently explained the situation to him, with the help of a child psychologist, he began to understand the danger he had been in. The whole experience left me shaken to my core. I had always known there were predators out there, but to come face to face with one, to see how easily they could worm their way into a child's life, it was terrifying. I hugged my little sisters extra tight that week and had long talks with them about internet safety. The Buckinghams made major changes after that night. They got rid of Tommy's tablet and severely restricted his internet access. They installed new security systems and cameras around the house, and they became vocal advocates for online safety, sharing their story to warn other parents. As for me, I still babysit for the Buckinghams, but now, every time I'm there, I find myself double-checking the locks, peering out windows, jumping at every unexpected sound. I know Mike is in jail now, but I can't shake the memory of his voice calling out for Tommy, the sound of his fists pounding on the door. I'm grateful every day that I discovered those messages when I did, but I'll never forget how close we came to tragedy, how easily an online predator almost made it into Tommy's real life. It's a reminder I carry with me always now, that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, and that vigilance is the price of keeping our kids safe in this digital world. I was working as a nanny for the Wilson family, taking care of their 2 kids, Jack and Emily. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon, and I had taken the children to the park near their house, like we often did after school. Jack, who was 8, was playing on the swings while 5-year-old Emily was building sandcastles in the sandbox. As I sat on a bench watching them, I noticed 3 men lingering on the edge of the park. Something about them immediately set off alarm bells in my head. They were dressed in dark clothes despite the warm weather, and kept looking around furtively as if scoping out the area. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. After about 15 minutes, I decided it was time to head back to the house. As we were leaving, I glanced back and saw the men starting to walk in our direction. My heart rate spiked. I quickened my pace, urging Jack and Emily to hurry along with me. "Why are we walking so fast?" Jack asked. "Oh, I just remembered I left something in the oven," I lied, not wanting to scare them. "We need to get back quickly." As soon as we got inside the house, I locked the door behind us and drew all the curtains. I tried to act normal as I got the kids a snack, but I kept obsessively peeking out the windows. To my horror, I saw the 3 men standing across the street, staring directly at the house. This couldn't be a coincidence. My hands shook as I called the police, speaking in a hushed tone so the kids wouldn't overhear. The dispatcher said they would send a car to check it out, but it could be up to 30 minutes. I hung up feeling completely on edge. Just then, there was a loud knock at the front door that made me jump. "Hello? Anyone home?" a gruff male voice called out. I froze, my blood running cold. I hadn't heard a car pull up. It had to be those men. "We're from the gas company," another voice said. "We need to check your meter." Yeah, right. I knew for a fact the Wilsons didn't have gas service. "Go away, or I'm calling the police," I shouted, trying to keep my voice from shaking. There was silence for a moment, then I heard hushed voices conferring outside. Suddenly, there was a tremendous crash as someone started trying to kick in the door. Adrenaline surged through me. I grabbed Jack and Emily, who had started crying in fright. "It's okay, sweethearts. We're going to play a little game," I said, forcing a smile. "We're going to hide, and you have to be super quiet, okay?" I quickly ushered them upstairs to Mr. and Mrs. Wilson's bedroom. The master closet was enormous, more like a small room, really. I got the kids situated in the back corner behind some hanging clothes. "Now remember, not a sound," I whispered. "I'll come get you when it's safe." With trembling hands, I locked the closet door behind me. I could hear heavy footsteps downstairs now. They had gotten in. Fighting back panic, I looked around frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a heavy crystal vase on the dresser. I dumped out the flowers and gripped it tightly, my palms sweating. I crouched down behind the bed, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they would hear it. The floorboards creaked as someone started coming up the stairs. I held my breath, willing myself to stay still. The bedroom door slowly opened. I caught a glimpse of a tall man with a scraggly beard entering. He was holding something. Oh God, was that a gun? Before I could think, survival instinct took over. I leapt up with a scream, swinging the vase as hard as I could. It connected with his head with a sickening crack. He stumbled but didn't go down. Blind with terror, I kept swinging, hitting him again and again until he finally collapsed. I stood there gasping, vase still raised, as blood started pooling on the carpet. What had I done? But there was no time to process it. I heard shouting and pounding footsteps racing up the stairs. I dropped the vase and ran to Mr. Wilson's nightstand. I knew he kept a handgun in there for home protection. With shaking hands, I managed to get it out and figured out how to flick the safety off just as 2 more men burst into the room. "Don't move," I screamed, pointing the gun at them. "I've already taken out your friend, and I won't hesitate to shoot you too." They hesitated, eyeing their unconscious companion on the floor. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. This clearly wasn't going according to their plan. "The cops are on their way," I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. "You better get out of here now if you don't want to end up in jail." Just then, we all heard the blessed sound of police sirens approaching. The men looked at each other, then turned and fled. I kept the gun trained on the doorway until I was sure they were gone, then sank to my knees, shaking uncontrollably. It was over. We had survived, but the nightmare wasn't quite finished yet. I went to the closet to get Jack and Emily, murmuring soothing words as I unlocked the door, but when I opened it, the closet was empty. "Jack? Emily?" I called out, my voice rising in panic. Where could they be? I searched the whole upstairs frantically, calling their names. Finally, I heard a small whimper coming from under the guest bed. I dropped to the floor, and there they were, huddled together. "Oh, thank God," I cried, gathering them into my arms. "It's okay now. You're safe." We went downstairs just as the police were entering. The next few hours passed in a blur of statements and crime scene texts. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson rushed home, holding Jack and Emily tightly as they sobbed in relief. The police praised me for my quick thinking and bravery. They said the men were part of a local gang who had been targeting homes in the area. Thanks to my actions, they were able to apprehend all three. But even as everyone called me a hero, I felt shaken to my core. The image of that man's bloodied face haunted me. The sounds of Jack and Emily's terrified cries echoed in my head. In the weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at every little noise. I couldn't sleep without nightmares. The Wilsons offered me time off, but I was afraid to be alone in my own apartment. Gradually, things started to get better. The Wilsons installed a top-of-the-line security system. We worked with a child therapist to help Jack and Emily process the trauma. I started seeing a counselor myself to deal with the PTSD. Months later, I still get a chill down my spine when I see someone who resembles those men. I'm hyper-vigilant about locking doors and being aware of my surroundings. But I also feel a new strength in myself. I now know without a doubt that I would do whatever it takes to protect those in my care. The experience changed me forever, but it also showed me what I'm capable of when pushed to the limit. I just hope I never have to find out again. It was supposed to be just another normal night of babysitting. I've been watching little Max for a few months now, ever since his mom, Emily, got that big promotion at work. The extra hours meant she needed help, and I was more than happy to pick up some cash on the side. Emily's apartment is nice, on the 12th floor of one of those fancy high-rises downtown. The view of the city at night is pretty amazing. Anyway, this particular evening started off like usual. Emily left for her late meeting around 7 p.m. Max and I had dinner, played some games, and then I put him to bed around 8:30. After that, I settled in on the couch to watch some TV and scroll through my phone. It must have been close to 10 p.m. when I first heard it, a weird scratching sound coming from the front door. At first I thought maybe it was just the neighbors in the hallway, but then I heard it again, more insistent this time. My heart started racing as I realized someone was trying to get in. I quickly turned off the TV and all the lights, then tiptoed over to peek through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man out there, hunched over the doorknob, clearly trying to pick the lock. Even in the dim hallway light, I could see he looked disheveled and agitated. For a split second, I was frozen in panic, but then my babysitter instincts kicked in. I had to protect Max. I ran to his room as quietly as I could and scooped him up out of bed. He started to fuss, but I shushed him urgently. "We have to be very quiet," I whispered. "It's like a game, okay?" I carried Max into Emily's bedroom and locked the door behind us. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial 911 on my phone. As it rang, I heard the front door of the apartment finally open. Heavy footsteps in the living room. Things being knocked over. When the dispatcher answered, I tried to keep my voice low and steady as I explained the situation. They said officers were on the way, but it felt like an eternity as I huddled there in the dark with a confused and sleepy 4-year-old. Suddenly, there was banging on the bedroom door. A man's voice shouted, "Emily, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Max started crying, and I held him close, my heart pounding out of my chest. I recognized the voice. It was Emily's ex-husband, Mark. She had mentioned him a few times, always with a worried look. said he had anger issues, that things had gotten ugly during the divorce. But I never imagined he'd do something like this. "Emily's not here," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "The police are on their way. Please leave." That just seemed to enrage him more. He started slamming against the door so hard I was afraid it would break. I backed us into the corner of the room, looking frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. But all I could do was try to comfort Max and pray the cops would get there in time. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I finally heard sirens approaching. Mark must have heard them too, because the banging stopped. There were shouts in the living room, the sound of a scuffle, and then blessed silence. A female officer eventually knocked on the bedroom door, assuring me it was safe to come out. I was shaking so bad I could barely turn the lock. When I opened the door, the scene in the living room was like something out of a crime show. Furniture overturned, Mark in handcuffs being led away, other officers taking photos and dusting for prints. I gave my statement in a daze, still clutching Max, who had mercifully fallen back asleep. They asked if I wanted to go to the hospital to get checked out, but I just wanted to stay with Max until Emily got home. One of the officers stayed with us, which made me feel a little safer. When Emily finally rushed in close to midnight, she burst into tears when she saw us. She hugged us both so tight, apologizing over and over. Apparently Mark had been leaving her threatening messages for weeks, but she never thought he'd actually break in. She felt terrible for putting us in danger. I tried to assure her it wasn't her fault, but honestly, I was still pretty shaken up. I mean, you hear about things like this on the news, but you never think it'll happen to you, you know. The whole night felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. In the days that followed, I had trouble sleeping. Every little noise made me jump. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering what might have happened if the police hadn't gotten there in time. Emily offered to let me take some time off, but honestly, being around Max and trying to keep things normal for him has helped. It's been a few weeks now, and things are slowly getting back to our regular routine. Emily's gotten a better security system installed, and Mark is facing some serious charges. But I still find myself double-checking the locks, always hyper-aware of my surroundings. I guess the whole experience has been a wake-up call about how quickly things can go wrong, how vulnerable we can be even in places we think are safe. It's also opened my eyes to the lasting impact of abusive relationships, how the fear can linger long after it's supposedly over. I'm trying not to let it change me too much, to not live in constant fear. But I know I'll never forget that night, the terror of feeling trapped and helpless. It's a reminder to always trust your instincts, to have a plan, to be prepared, because you never know when a normal night of babysitting might turn into the scariest experience of your life. The car had served me well for years, but with a growing family, I needed something bigger. I figured selling it privately would get me a better price than trading it in. So I snapped some photos, wrote up a description, and posted the ad. Within a day, I got a response from a guy named Jeff. He seemed friendly and legitimate in his messages, asking all the right questions about the car's history and condition. We agreed to meet up that Saturday afternoon for him to take a look and maybe do a test drive. Jeff showed up right on time, looking like a typical suburban dad in khakis and a polo shirt. He gave the car a thorough once-over, checking under the hood and kicking the tires. Everything seemed normal as we chatted about the vehicle. "Mind if we take it for a spin?" Jeff asked casually. "I'd like to see how it handles on the road." "Sure thing," I replied, tossing him the keys. I climbed into the passenger seat, not thinking twice about letting a stranger drive. As we pulled away from my house, Jeff kept up a steady stream of small talk. He asked about my job, my family, how long I'd owned the car. I started to relax, thinking this might be a quick and easy sail. But after about 10 minutes, I realized we were heading out of town. "Hey, where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "This is a bit far for a test drive." Jeff's demeanor changed in an instant. His friendly smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "We're going exactly where I want to go," he said in a low voice. "And you're going to shut up if you know what's good for you." My blood ran cold as I saw him reach into his pocket and pull out a switchblade. He flicked it open, keeping one hand on the wheel as he pointed it at me. "Don't try anything stupid," he growled. Panic flooded through me as the reality of the situation hit. This wasn't a car sale, it was a kidnapping. My mind raced, trying to figure out how I could escape, but we were on an isolated country road with no other cars in sight. Jeff turned onto a dirt track leading into a wooded area. My heart pounded as trees closed in around us. He drove deep into the forest before finally stopping in a small clearing. "Get out," he ordered, gesturing with the knife. My legs felt like jelly as I stepped out of the car. Jeff came around to my side, grabbing my arm roughly. "Start walking," he said, pushing me towards the trees. As we moved deeper into the woods, my terror grew. What was he planning to do to me out here? I thought of my family, wondering if I'd ever see them again. Suddenly, Jeff's grip on my arm loosened as he stumbled on a tree root. In that split second, survival instinct took over. I wrenched my arm free and started running blindly through the forest. I could hear Jeff crashing through the underbrush behind me, shouting threats. Branches whipped at my face as I zigzagged between trees, desperate to lose him. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but sheer adrenaline kept me going. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the tree line onto a paved road. To my immense relief, I saw a car approaching. I waved my arms frantically, screaming for help. The car slowed to a stop, an older woman peering out at me in confusion. "Please," I gasped, "I need help. A man is chasing me. He kidnapped me. Please call the police." The woman's eyes widened in alarm. She quickly unlocked her doors. "Get in," she urged. I dove into the passenger seat just as Jeff emerged from the woods. The woman floored it, peeling away as Jeff futilely chased after us. My hands shook as I used the woman's phone to call 911. I babbled out what had happened to the dispatcher between gulps of air. They assured me police were on their way to intercept us. Sure enough, we soon saw flashing lights approaching. Multiple police cars surrounded us, and I've never been so relieved to see law enforcement in my life. The next few hours passed in a blur of giving statements and identifying Jeff in a lineup after he was apprehended trying to steal my car. It turned out he was a serial offender who had been targeting Craigslist sellers for months. I was incredibly lucky to have escaped. If that woman hadn't driven by when she did, who knows what would have happened to me in those woods. The whole ordeal left me shaken to my core. For weeks afterwards, I jumped at every sound and struggled to sleep. I'm still dealing with anxiety and trust issues, but I'm also profoundly grateful to be alive and back with my family. I've learned some hard lessons about being more cautious with online transactions. These days I insist on meeting in public places and bringing someone with me. And I'm much more wary of strangers, even ones who seem friendly at first. My old Honda Civic is still sitting in my driveway. I can't bring myself to try selling it again. Too many bad memories. Maybe I'll just donate it to charity and be done with it. This experience taught me how quickly an ordinary day can turn into a nightmare. I'm sharing my story as a warning to others. Always trust your instincts. Be careful who you meet up with, and have safety precautions in place. You never know when you might need them. I still have nightmares about those terrifying moments in the woods. The sound of footsteps behind me, the glint of that knife, the certainty that I was going to die. But I'm working through the trauma in therapy and trying to move forward with my life. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't managed to get away. Would anyone have ever found me? Would my family have known what happened? The what-ifs can drive you crazy if you let them. I'm just thankful that my story had a relatively happy ending. Not everyone is so fortunate. I hope that by sharing what happened to me, I can help prevent others from falling victim to similar schemes. So if you're selling something online, please be careful. Meet in public places. Bring a friend. Trust your gut if something feels off. It could save your life, like it did mine. I'll never forget the terror of that day, or the immense relief of escape. It's a stark reminder of how precious and fragile life can be. I'm holding my loved ones a little closer these days, grateful for every moment we have together. And to the kind woman who stopped to help a desperate stranger on the side of the road, I owe you everything. You're the reason I'm here to tell this story. I'll be forever grateful for your courage and compassion. As for Jeff, I try not to think about him. He's in prison now, unable to hurt anyone else. But the memory of his cold eyes and that glinting knife still haunt me. I hope he stays locked up for a very long time. This ordeal changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more cautious, more aware of potential dangers, but I'm also more appreciative of the good in people, like that woman who saved me. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again, but I'm working on it, day by day, and I'm determined not to let fear rule my life. After all, I fought hard for this second chance. I intend to make the most of it. I drove to the address Rick provided, a small house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. As I pulled up, I saw Rick standing in the driveway, guitar case in hand. He was a tall, lanky guy with long graying hair and a scraggly beard. Something about his appearance made me uneasy, but I brushed it off as just nerves about making such a big purchase. Rick greeted me with an oddly intense stare and invited me inside to check out the guitar. The house was cluttered and dimly lit, with piles of junk everywhere. A musty smell hit me as soon as I stepped through the door. Rick led me to a back room that was crammed full of guitars and music equipment. He opened the case, and there it was, a beautiful '65 Strat in pristine condition. I carefully picked it up, examining every inch. It certainly looked authentic, though I'm no expert. I strummed a few chords, and it sounded amazing. Despite my lingering unease about Rick, I knew I had to have this guitar. We haggled a bit on price before settling on $3,500 cash. It was more than I'd planned to spend, but still a good deal for such a rare instrument. I counted out the money and handed it over to Rick, who snatched it up eagerly. As I was packing up the guitar to leave, Rick kept hovering uncomfortably close, peppering me with questions about where I lived and what I did for work. I gave vague answers, not wanting to share personal details. Finally, I managed to extract myself from Rick's house, guitar in hand. As I drove home, a sense of excitement about my new purchase overcame the weird vibes from the interaction with Rick. I couldn't wait to get home and really try out the Strat. Over the next few days, I was in guitar heaven. The Strat played like a dream and sounded even better than I'd hoped. I spent hours noodling around, learning classic riffs, and just enjoying my new instrument. But on the fourth day after buying it, things took a dark turn. I was walking out of a coffee shop near my apartment when I spotted a familiar figure across the street. It was Rick, just standing there staring at me. A chill ran down my spine. What were the odds he'd be in my neighborhood? I quickly got in my car and drove home, constantly checking my rearview mirror. No sign of Rick following me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I was awoken at 2 a.m. by the sound of someone trying to open my front door. Heart pounding, I crept to the peephole and saw Rick outside, fumbling with the lock. I immediately called 911 and reported an attempted break-in. By the time police arrived, Rick was gone. The next day, I was a nervous wreck. I kept the curtains drawn and jumped at every little noise. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Rick. How the hell did he get my number? I let it go to voicemail. He left a rambling message about how he'd made a mistake selling me his guitar and needed it back. His tone was manic and threatening. I called the police again to report the harassment. They took a report but said there wasn't much they could do unless Rick actually committed a crime. I felt utterly helpless. That evening, I was in my living room strumming the Strat when movement outside caught my eye. I peeked through the blinds and saw Rick standing on the sidewalk, staring up at my window. I froze, hoping he hadn't seen me. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, he finally walked away. I barely slept that night, constantly listening for any sounds of intrusion. The next morning, I seriously debated just giving Rick the guitar back to make this all go away. But I'd paid good money for it, and it wasn't right that he was terrorizing me. I decided to do some digging online about Rick. After some searching, I found a local news article from a few months back about a string of vintage guitar thefts in the Austin area. The article included a blurry security camera image of the suspect. It looked a lot like Rick. Armed with this new information, I went to the police station to file another report. This time, they took me more seriously. They said they'd investigate Rick's connection to the guitar thefts and step up patrols in my neighborhood. A week passed with no sign of Rick. I started to relax a bit, thinking maybe he'd given up. But then one night, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. Someone was inside my apartment. I grabbed my phone and locked myself in the bathroom, calling 911 in a panic. I heard heavy footsteps and Rick's voice calling out, "Where's my guitar? I know you have it." There was a crash as he presumably searched my bedroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Just as I heard Rick approaching the bathroom door, sirens wailed in the distance. He cursed and I heard him run out of the apartment. Moments later, the police arrived. They searched the area, but Rick had vanished. The next day, detectives interviewed me and took the Stratocaster as evidence. They explained that Rick was now the prime suspect in a series of high-end guitar thefts across Texas. Apparently, he'd been stealing valuable instruments and selling them online to unsuspecting buyers like me. A few days later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. They'd arrested Rick. They found him holed up in a storage unit full of stolen guitars and other music equipment. The detective told me they were able to trace several of the guitars back to their rightful owners. As for my Strat, it turned out to be one of the stolen instruments. The police were able to track down the original owner, a retired session musician in Houston. While I was disappointed to lose the guitar, I was mostly just relieved that the nightmare was over. In the weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at shadows and struggling to feel safe in my own home. I installed a security system and started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and trauma from the whole ordeal. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I missed with Rick. His odd behavior, the too-good-to-be-true deal, the cluttered house full of music gear. I was so blinded by the prospect of owning a dream guitar that I ignored my instincts. I've sworn off Craigslist and now only buy guitars from reputable dealers. While I still love playing, it took a long time before I could pick up a guitar without thinking of Rick and those terrifying nights. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the police hadn't shown up when they did. Would Rick have hurt me? Would he have just taken the guitar and left? I try not to dwell on those thoughts. This experience taught me a harsh lesson about trusting strangers and being more cautious in my dealings. I'm grateful it didn't end worse, but the memory of those fear-filled days and nights will stay with me forever. Now, whenever I hear about instrument theft or Craigslist scams, I share my story as a warning to others. You never know when a simple purchase could turn into a living nightmare. I was just trying to sell my old dining set, you know? Nothing fancy, just a simple oak table with 6 matching chairs. I'd had it for years, but it was time for an upgrade, so I listed it online, figuring it'd be an easy sale. Little did I know what I was getting myself into. A guy named Tom responded to my ad pretty quickly. He seemed normal enough over text, asking the usual questions about dimensions and condition. We set up a time for him to come take a look that weekend. I didn't think much of it. I'd sold plenty of stuff online before without any issues. When Saturday rolled around, I tidied up my apartment a bit and waited for Tom to arrive. The doorbell rang right on time, and I opened up to find a tall, lanky guy with disheveled hair standing there. Something about his eyes immediately put me on edge. They were darting around rapidly, never quite focusing on me. "Hi, you must be Tom," I said, trying to keep things friendly. "Come on in. The dining set is just over here." He mumbled something in response and stepped inside, his gaze sweeping across my living room. I led him over to the dining area, chattering about the set's features to fill the awkward silence. Tom barely seemed to be listening. He ran his hands over the table's surface, bent down to examine the chair's legs. The whole time he kept glancing around at the rest of my apartment. "So what do you think?" I asked after a few minutes. "It's in great condition, barely any wear and tear." Tom straightened up, finally meeting my eyes. "It's nice," he said flatly. "I'll take it." Just like that, no haggling or further questions. I was a bit surprised but relieved to have made the sale so easily. We sorted out payment details, and I helped Tom carry the pieces down to his truck. As he was about to drive off, he turned to me with an unsettling smile. "Thanks," he said. "I'll be seeing you around." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I brushed it off as post-sale jitters and headed back up to my now dining set-free apartment. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. Every little noise from outside made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard shuffling sounds coming from the hallway outside my door. Figuring it was probably just a neighbor, I tried to ignore it. But then I heard the distinct sound of someone trying to turn my doorknob. My heart started racing. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. The doorknob rattled again, more forcefully this time. Then came a scratching noise, like someone was trying to pick the lock. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911, whispering frantically to the operator about the attempted break-in. They assured me police were on the way and told me to stay on the line. The scratching at my door continued, growing more frantic. I could hear heavy breathing on the other side. Then a voice, Tom's voice, muttering angrily. Come on, open up." I was paralyzed with fear, hardly daring to breathe. The police couldn't get here fast enough. Just as I heard a final click from the lock, there was a commotion in the hallway. Shouts of, "Police! Freeze! followed by the sounds of a scuffle. When I finally worked up the courage to peer out my peephole, I saw two officers handcuffing Tom on the ground. They must have caught him just as he was about to burst in. I sagged against the wall in relief, my legs barely able to support me. The next hour was a blur of giving statements and answering questions. It turned out Tom had a history of breaking into homes and stealing valuables. When they searched his truck, they found a list of addresses, including mine. He'd been using online marketplace listings to scout out potential targets. As the police explained all this, a horrible realization washed over me. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if the police hadn't arrived so quickly, I shuddered to think what might have happened. In the days that followed, I beefed up my home security and became much more cautious about who I let into my apartment. But I still couldn't shake the feeling of violation. Every creak and bump in the night sent my heart racing. I kept replaying that moment in my head, hearing Tom's angry muttering on the other side of my door. It's been months now, and I'm still jumpy. I've moved to a new place, hoping for a fresh start. But I can't help wondering, how many other Toms are out there, using innocent transactions as a way to prey on people? The thought keeps me up at night. I know rationally that what happened to me was rare, that most people aren't out to hurt you. But that experience shattered my sense of safety in my own home. It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone. So if you're selling stuff online, please be careful. Trust your gut if something feels off about a buyer. And maybe think twice before letting strangers into your home. You never know what their true intentions might be. I still get chills thinking about how close I came to disaster that night, all over a simple dining set. These days, I'd rather donate old furniture than risk another encounter like that. Some prices are just too high to pay. The whole ordeal has left me questioning so much. How well do we really know the people we interact with every day? What darkness might be lurking behind a friendly facade? It's made me much more guarded, for better or worse. I try not to let the fear control my life. I still use online marketplaces occasionally, but I'm much more cautious now. I always meet in public places, bring a friend if possible, and trust my instincts. If something feels off, I bail immediately. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Tom had gotten into my apartment that night. Would he have just stolen my valuables and left? Or did he have something more sinister in mind? The not knowing is almost worse than the actual events. I've talked to a therapist about the trauma, which has helped some. But there are still nights when I bolt awake in a cold sweat, convinced I hear scratching at my door. It takes me a while to calm down and convince myself it's just my imagination. The experience has made me much more aware of my surroundings. I'm always scanning for potential threats, even in seemingly safe situations. It's exhausting sometimes, but I can't seem to turn it off. I've connected with other victims of similar crimes online. Hearing their stories has been both comforting and terrifying. Comforting to know I'm not alone, but terrifying to realize how common these incidents are. One silver lining is that I've become much closer with my neighbors. We've set up a neighborhood watch program and look out for each other. It's nice to feel like part of a community that has each other's backs. Still, there are moments when the fear and paranoia threaten to overwhelm me. I'll be going about my day normally when suddenly a flash of memory hits me. Tom's unsettling smile, the sound of him trying to break in. It can send me into a spiral of anxiety that's hard to shake. I try to focus on the positives. I'm safe. Tom is in jail, and I've taken steps to protect myself better in the future. But it's a constant battle to not let the fear take over. Sometimes I catch myself wondering about Tom. What led him down this path? Was he always a criminal?